the Industrial Revolution of the Mage Lord. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction. So please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter. And if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 526, Hearing the Truth in Order. The Stone of Life could not control the catalytic effect and process, which was something Harvey had never expected. He asked with a mixture of laughter and tears, "So, until now, the magic world has rarely heard of your two tribes collaborating to create the Stone of Life? It's not because your relationship is hostile or you exclude each other, but because the stone's benefits are so insignificant." Windtalker nodded, his demeanor still elegant and dignified, but he didn't glance at the dwarf across from him. "Yes, there is no true blood feud between my people and the dwarves. It's just that our respective paths diverge somewhat, and we don't communicate much." Lava rolled his eyes and replied bluntly, "There are indeed differences. Compared to humans, we dislike closed-minded, conservative, and arrogant tribes even more." The foreign student Steelmane quietly nudged him with his elbow, making Lava immediately realize his mistake. He quickly added, "Of course, your majesty is different. Whether it's accepting our people to come to Spark City to study magic or opening up new trade routes for mutual benefit, the help the Forum has given us is already considerable. We have absolute respect and friendship for you." The elves have the same attitude. Windtalker, along with the other handsome elves behind him, bowed in greeting. Harvey waved his hand, smiling wryly. "Your sincerity and assistance are undeniable, but the difficulty now lies in how to effectively utilize the Life Stone once it's created. If it turns out as you claim, the hopes Starfire City has placed on it will be dashed." Upon hearing this, the dwarves and elves lowered their heads, their expressions solemn. If they failed to achieve the results Harvey envisioned, not only would their seats in the new Federation be lost, but their subsequent preferential treatment in the Forum, as well as their real-world exchanges and trade, would also be hindered. This was unacceptable to them. Before Harvey could offer any words of comfort, the laboratory door suddenly flung open. Egno led a team of hybrid elves in white lab robes and walked straight into the laboratory. He came to Harvey and bowed, saying, "Your Majesty, I may have a way to control the Stone of Life and successfully control the catalytic process of plant seeds." Harvey was stunned for a moment, and then he heard Chris beside him exclaim in surprise, "What are you doing back again? You, hybrid. Blood-tainted." The Wind Whisperer was shocked and angry, his eyes wide, barely maintaining his remaining composure. He turned to Harvey and said, "Your Majesty, what do you mean by this?" Harvey sighed and said lightly, "Spark City's acceptance of hybrid elves has the tacit approval of the Golden Forest. You may not be aware of it personally, but the international students sent here before must have had a lot of dealings with them over this long time." Tacit approval? The earliest elven apprentices who came to the north had already dealt with these hybrids? The Windtalker sucked in a breath of cold air and turned to look at the several foreign students who were standing aside with their necks hunched. He asked with suppressed anger, "Is what your Majesty said true? You really have become friends with these hybrids?" Seeing that the other party ignored him and turned to make things difficult for his students, Egno also became furious and said mercilessly, "The Golden Forest has been self-isolating and clinging to tradition for too long. It has no idea of the changes in the outside world. If it weren't for your insistence on the old-fashioned rules of pure blood, the elves would not have declined to the point where they are now." He raised his hand and pointed at the elven students standing in the corner like quails. "They strictly abide by the confidentiality agreement of Starfire City and do not spread what they have learned and seen here at will. If your Majesty allows, I can prove that even as hybrids, in the study and practice of the way of nature, people like us are probably far superior to you." As soon as he said this, a whisper came out. Not only did the elves boo, but even the dwarves couldn't help but prick up their ears, with expressions of watching the fun on their faces. The Windtalker, feeling somewhat embarrassed, angrily shouted, "You're worthy enough to discuss the way of nature with me? Just a few natural spells you learned from human spellcasters? Spells are spells, and Tao is Tao. Don't mess with me." It turns out the elves, when resolving internal conflicts, rely on a talk-and-tell approach to truth debating, rather than resorting to physical persuasion through magical duels like the Union. Harvey suddenly felt that this tradition of theirs resembled the discussions of Tao philosophy of ancient sages. With such a detached focus on empty talk, it's no wonder that despite their longevity, the elves have been confined to the eastern reaches of the south. But Egno was clearly not one for rhetoric. Under Harvey's influence, the research-oriented spellcasters of Spark City have adopted a pragmatic approach, their motto always being practice makes perfect. Perhaps their theoretical abilities are inferior to those of the pure-blood elves from the east. Furthermore, Harvey himself knew nothing about nature spellcasting, and he had no suitable means of helping Egno improve. Most of the time, he could only provide sufficient funds and resources, leaving him to work in the potion garden and fields with a group of half-elf students, gradually learning and growing through trial and error. Furthermore, since Windtalker had a seat on the forum, he must be a high-level spellcaster. Although he looked like a weak researcher, he was still much more powerful than Egno, a mid-level spellcaster. Harvey has always been ruthless when it comes to protecting his shortcomings, and he quickly stepped forward to ease the tense situation. All right, everyone, please exercise restraint. Since there is a conflict of ideas, let's verify each other's abilities through facts. He paused, looked at Egno with a look of trust and said, since Egno said that there is a way to control the Stone of Life and do things that even the pure-blooded elves of the Golden Forest can't do, why don't you let him try to prove it? On the surface, he was asking for opinions from all parties, but from a mighty point of view, he would not tolerate the elves' and dwarves' refusal. The Windtalker took a deep breath, nodded firmly and said, all right, since your majesty and the elders of my tribe have reached a tacit agreement to accommodate hybrids, I will not pursue this matter too much. Let this hybrid prove to us the abilities he claims, and see how much he surpasses us in the study of the ways of nature. In fact, Harvey was not absolutely sure, and subconsciously decided to delay time a little. So he smiled and said, let's leave it at that for today. After all, you have come from far away, so you should return to the reception hotel and rest for a while. We will officially start the experiment tomorrow. We must successfully manufacture the Stone of Life before we can try to control and use it. The pure-blooded elves suppressed their anger and saluted Harvey again, and then without even looking at Egno and others, they left the laboratory arrogantly with the reception staff. Seeing this, the dwarves also took their leave from Harvey. Harvey sighed deeply, looking at Egno, whose eyes were slightly red as he stood there. He said in a gentle, soothing voice, regarding the issue of the Stone of Life, even if your idea doesn't succeed, they won't be able to cause much trouble. Compared to the Golden Tree Heart, they are the ones who truly need us. Egno, however, showed no sign of being insulted or aggrieved. He said seriously, Your Majesty, please rest assured. We still rely on them for our grain catalysis and crop planting. Turning against them directly would be even more disastrous, so I must succeed, both for myself, for the other students, and for our Spark City. Chris scratched his head, annoyed. Stop being sentimental. How exactly do you plan to do it? What are your chances of success? The hybrid elf pondered for a moment, then said slowly, more than 80% chance of success. I've tried other methods before, and the magical method your majesty taught me should be effective. Harvey asked, the method I taught you? What do you mean? Soul stitching. Egno shook his head and answered honestly, it's not about soul refining. It's about your programming technique. Harvey and Chris' eyes widened at the same time, staring at him in disbelief. This guy was actually planning to apply the programming technology Harvey had developed to control magic mayflies directly to the manipulation of natural elements. Oh my god. Isn't this a complete metaphysical version of gene editing? Chapter 527 Stone of Life. The Lifestone's crafting ritual wasn't completed within the alchemy laboratory, but was temporarily relocated to the nearby Potions Botanical Garden, which also served as the Starfire City Hospital's Pharmacy Research Center. According to the requirements of the elves and dwarves, the Potions Botanical Garden was the area richest in natural elements in all of Starfire City. Human intervention in the ritual wasn't crucial for creating the Lifestone. It relied more on the natural attraction and stimulation of magic and the elements created by the fusion of the two precious materials. Harvey had no intention of participating in the entire crafting ritual. Although he had learned the detailed procedures from ancient texts, he wasn't an elementalist by birth, and his ability to perceive and manipulate the elements was far inferior to that of the dwarves and elves. Furthermore, the young, highly skilled individuals sent by both tribes to assist him were carefully trained young men, making him unnecessary to carry out the task himself. Your Majesty, the rituals recorded in the texts aren't that complicated at all, Chris, observing alongside Harvey, murmured in confusion. Why do these elves insist on both playing and chanting to a crystal tree heart? Egno frowned and explained in a low voice, nature's mass is an ancient tradition of the golden forest. They believe that golden trees are intelligent beings of equal status to elves. Therefore, fusing the life stone is equivalent to sacrificing a living soul of their own kind, hence the sorrow and reluctance in the chanting, as Dallin chuckled and said calmly, that's because your Majesty hasn't given them enough. If the benefits were tempting enough, they'd be more than happy to cut down large tracts of golden trees and send them to Spark City for firewood. In contrast, the dwarven ritual was much simpler and more brutal. Lava held a clay jar containing the liquid crystal core and placed it on a massive volcanic rock they had found in advance. After muttering an ancient incantation, he decisively raised an intricately shaped brass hammer and smashed the jar open, revealing a jelly-like mass of earth crystal core within. An invisible mage's hand lifted the earth crystal core and gently dropped it into a metal cauldron used for mixing potions. The elves then carefully added a golden tree heart. Strangely, the crystalline tree heart disintegrated into a handful of fine sand the moment it came into contact with the liquid earth core. Without any stirring, it blended evenly with the core, causing tiny, star-like shimmers to appear within the translucent jelly. Immediately afterwards, the dwarves and elves began to remove various magical plant crystals, even unrecognizable to Arslan and Chris, from their respective material boxes. Seemingly chaotic, but in reality following a rhythmic process, they were dropped one by one into the metal cauldron. Subtle fluctuations of magical energy gradually began to rise within the Potion Research Center. Even Harvey and others, who were not elemental spellcasters, could clearly sense the natural forces gathering within the botanical garden. However, this wasn't the life stone actively absorbing the magical energy contained in the surrounding plants during the ritual. It was more like these natural forces had suddenly emerged from thin air and then dissipated from another dimension. Harvey nodded thoughtfully, turning to Egno standing beside him and saying, "You guessed correctly. The life stone's natural energy comes from the magical web. It's essentially an elemental converter, transforming pure magic into natural energy. Since the form and properties of magic can be transformed, the converter itself can naturally be manipulated and edited, without even requiring magical reducing agents like demon spirit extract." About half an hour later, the wildly fluctuating natural forces in the botanical garden began to stabilize. A closer look revealed that the natural magic that had just escaped from the invisible rifts in the plains had now been fully concentrated within the metal cauldrons before the elves and dwarves. Harvey and his men slowly approached. Within the cauldron, held together by lava and wind talker, they saw an ordinary, off-white stone. It was indeed an off-white stone, partially covered in the dark green moss common in the wasteland. Even if it were immediately dropped onto the riverbank, no one would recognize it as the Stone of Life, a fusion of the rare treasures of the elves and dwarves. Your Majesty, don't be surprised. I believe that even in the human classics, there is no specific record of the appearance of the Stone of Life, right? The Wind Whisperer smiled proudly but reservedly, and explained slowly, that's because the Stone of Life has no fixed form. When it was made in the Golden Forest, it could be a broadleaf, and in the cave city it became a piece of metal or lava. Also added in a muffled voice, yes, when it was made in the wizard tower of the spellcaster in the southern border, it even became a stone brick for building the city wall, so it is said that it has independent consciousness and cannot be controlled. And today it was made in the Magic Potion Botanical Garden, also in a huge city of human activities, but it did not turn into bricks or metal ingots, but was born in the most primitive and natural form of pebbles. This also proves that the wasteland is originally a place rich in natural forces and teeming with vitality. Windtalker subtly complimented Harvey. Your Majesty, the variety of magical plants cultivated in your potion garden alone far exceeds that of the southern border. I've even discovered several I've never seen or heard of before. I wonder if you could. The elves had an innate affinity for plants, and naturally, they were reluctant to let go of rare or unknown magical plants. They quickly pleaded with Harvey to grant them a few seedlings to take back to the eastern border, or to exchange them for other magical materials of equal value. The garden did indeed contain many magical plants unique to the northern wasteland, but they were not considered rare or precious. Many ordinary residents of Spark City would occasionally discover some mysterious and unknown plants during their weekend outings. They would uproot or mark them, then report them to the hospital. Once their usefulness was confirmed, they would gradually transplant them into the garden. Mr. Egno is in charge of the potions botanical garden. You should beg him for magic plant seedlings, not me, Harvey said casually. The elves immediately felt awkward. Just yesterday, they had expressed their disgust and disdain for these hybrids in front of His Majesty, and now they were demanding favors from them. Such behavior was unacceptable. Although Harvey had deliberately offered them an opportunity to slap him in the face, Egno had no intention of completely antagonizing these purebloods. He said calmly, according to the Botanical Garden's regulations, you can simply request an exchange with magic plant seedlings of equal value. He wasn't trying to curry favor, nor was he deliberately trying to embarrass them, appearing more magnanimous than the purebloods. The Wind Whisperer was silent for a moment, then he said after a dry cough, well, the most important thing now is how to control the Stone of Life. When you can fulfill your promise to show us a more powerful way of nature, we can talk about equal exchanges later. After putting the Stone of Life into a box and handing it to Harvey, the elves immediately bowed and took their leave. They had no intention of staying in the hybrids' territory. Anyway, the agreed time to fulfill their promise was 1 week later. This period of time was just enough for them to obtain Harvey's permission and freely travel around Spark City for sightseeing. Compared to the prosperous and wealthy city full of novelty, they still prefer the wild but vibrant wilderness. After the elves left, the dwarf Lava walked up to Harvey with a smile and said in a somewhat anxious tone, "Your Majesty, please allow us to freely enter and exit the public chess and card rooms you built in the city, by the earth. The card game Dragon Quest you invented is so interesting. It was all because of the dwarf foreign students living in Spark City who brought them cards." A group of dwarves played cards all night long in the hotel, which naturally caused complaints and protests from the elves. However, ID cards need to be checked to enter the public chess and card rooms. Originally, it was to prohibit minors from entering, but who knew that this group of out-of-town card guys were also stopped? Chapter 528 Elements. A howling cold wind mingled with scattered falling snowflakes and ice crystals. Spark City had only been heated for less than 2 weeks, and even Harvey's castle's underground laboratory had already activated its water heater, embedded in the walls and ground. Even during the bright daylight hours, the underground laboratory maintained a constant state of illumination, its magic stone fully illuminated. Aside from the dozens of defensive alchemy beasts silently stationed against the walls, the vast underground space was occupied only by Harvey, Chris, and Egno. "I say, will this really work?" Chris asked for the 6th time, his nagging voice making Harvey resist the urge to expel him. "We're only just getting started," Harvey said helplessly, straightening up and handing the main control position at the lab table to Egno. "This is just the first step, the element separation phase. The Lifestone, seemingly unremarkable, no different from the cold pebbles on the riverbank, was now secured by a metal base and brackets, quietly placed on the flat, spacious lab table. Next to it stood a rack filled with test tubes, containing the magical reducing agent Harvey had extracted from the living spirits. Egno carefully removed a test tube and, using a glass aspirator, dripped the diluted liquid onto the Lifestone surface. Tisk, logically, the diluted reducing agent should be enough to trigger a reaction in this transformative magic stone, Egno said, scratching his head with a free hand. Is it because there aren't enough variables? We can't just immerse the entire stone in the reducing agent, right? The three of them had conducted numerous groundbreaking experiments with the spirit extract in the past, but the results had always been less than satisfactory. This magical reducing agent was too unique, and the reduction process, like the Lifestone, was uninterruptible. Once the reduction reaction began, the ultimate result was that the experimental object was completely purged of all foreign impurities, becoming the purest and most pristine magical energy within the magic network. Therefore, during the experiment, repeatedly diluting the reducing agent with the liquid magic energy and adjusting the dilution ratio accordingly yielded a surprisingly effective solution, at least in preparing magical potions. It saved the experimenters a lot of time waiting for the drug to react. We're essentially starting from scratch, gradually increasing the reducing agent dosage. If we start with a high concentration extract without dilution, and the Lifestone disintegrates immediately, that would be a complete waste of precious gold in hard and earth core. This was earned by Harvey with his personal reputation and a verbal promise. It's just one, not an inexhaustible supply. Chris sighed and walked to the device rack by the wall. With the help of the alchemy beast, he assembled a set of mechanical tentacles onto his body. This was Harvey's second set of non-humanoid alchemical limbs, after Reiner's. They could be successfully attached to the human body through prosthetic connections without damaging the flesh itself. They were relatively lightweight and more flexible. Your Majesty, if you insist on using a reducing agent to change the properties of the life stone, for now, we can only resort to exhaustive methods, trying every possible combination. Harvey nodded helplessly at Chris's actions, then walked over to a recliner and picked up a cup of hot tea. 3 people with 6 hands would indeed be slow and cumbersome to operate, so having Chris with 8 hands would actually be more convenient. After all, the mechanical tentacles were alchemical creations connected to the spinal nerves, and in a sense, a product of soul-stitching technology. Their use was not much different from that of natural limbs, a feeling of being able to use them like fingers on one arm. Harvey and Egno, having completely ceded their control positions, simply sat aside with their hot tea, watching Chris, like an octopus, standing energetically at the lab table, rapidly completing repeated experimental procedures. He was also able to simultaneously manage experimental operations, observe reactions, and keep records. He watched as the diluted extract, which had been dripped onto the life stone surface but showed no reaction, consumed more and more. The waste solution was then sucked back up by the aspirator and drained into a nearby waste collection tank. Egno's heart sank to the bottom. Without the ability to extract the natural elements contained within the life stone, he couldn't deconstruct its internal transformation model. Failure to fulfill the promise he'd made in front of the pure-blooded elves the day before would not only tarnish his personal reputation, it would also significantly hinder His Majesty Harvey's goals, hindering the entire Starfire City's grain production. That shouldn't be the case. It clearly absorbs pure magical energy from other planes and transforms it through its own unique properties. If it can absorb it, why can't it release it? The hybrid elf, disregarding any pretense of elegance in front of Harvey, dipped his slender fingers into the teacup and began calculating directly on the clean, smooth coffee table. Harvey's heart suddenly stirred at the sight. Wait! Chris, stop! He abruptly stood up, walked over to the central connector, and commanded the alchemy beast, connect me to the central energy array. I need to enter the magic network. Chris, bewildered by his sudden halt to his experiment, subconsciously exchanged a glance with Egno, who was also confused, and hurried forward to assist Harvey in connecting to the magic network. He donned the metal hood, activated the energy array, and instantly opened the magic network passage. The familiar dizzying feeling immediately overwhelmed Harvey, giving him the comforting illusion of being completely immersed in warm water. Ever since he devoured and fused the magic core, every time he entered the magic network, he felt a strange sense of comfort and warmth, like a baby returning to its mother's womb. As expected. Beside the ever-expanding and contracting, irregularly shifting, mutated magic patterns, a ball of blue and white energy hovered quietly within the magic network. Harvey had deliberately channeled a large area of densely packed energy channels from the surrounding area. The living spirits, acting as sentinels for the magic pattern's defense, swam freely, but deliberately avoided the light ball hidden near the tiny channels. The spirits loathed this light ball, or perhaps they were afraid of it. Harvey raised his hand and commanded a spirit that had wandered to his side to approach. The spirit paused, then reluctantly swam towards the light ball with its large tadpole-like head. The next moment, the quietly suspended light ball suddenly extended a tiny, luminous tentacle. It quickly and decisively grabbed the spirit and devoured it at a visible speed. Was this predation? Was this how the life stone transformed pure magic? Simply passively waiting for demonic spirits to approach wouldn't be enough to absorb a significant amount of magic power. If Harvey hadn't given the command, how could it possibly have absorbed any demonic spirits with its passive attitude? Confused, Harvey extended his mental tentacles again, attempting to sense the demonic spirit he had just ordered to die, only to discover it was still alive. Although absorbed into the ball of light, it hadn't been immediately fused, nor had it been transformed from demonic spirit form into elemental energy. However, Harvey could clearly sense the demonic spirit within the ball of light constantly sending him signals in response, lazy, expressing displeasure, pleas for release, and an inexplicable sense of helplessness. The ball of light that the life stone presented within the magic net wasn't an energy-converting device, but rather a cage and trap designed to ensnare demonic spirits. Harvey suddenly realized that it was generating elemental energy by capturing and trapping demonic spirits, forcing them to perform the work of transforming magic power on its behalf. No wonder this thing can control the catalytic process autonomously. It turns out it's not me operating it at all. Harvey quickly escaped the magic network space and returned to the real world. As soon as he lifted the connection hood, he stood up and laughed heartily. I know the core of the problem. Their next experiment didn't require coding the life stone, but rather issuing repetitive commands to the demon spirit contained within it, and the life stone was essentially just a hardware carrier. Chapter 529, Rebirth. By the time Windtalker and Lava met Harvey again, it had been nearly a week since they arrived in Spark City. Experimental research on the life stone was once again scheduled for the magical botanical gardens managed by Egno. This time, the pureblood elves were no longer curious about the garden's vast variety of unknown magical plants. Instead, the hybrid elves' reassurances fueled their urgency for answers. Could the life stone be manipulated into a truly powerful amplification device of natural elements? As everyone gradually arrived, Harvey clapped his hands, coughed lightly, and said, "Everyone, we've gathered here today to test whether the modified life stone can precisely control the process of promoting plant growth." He signaled Egno with his eyes, and he immediately carried the box containing the life stone to a plant bed surrounded by a crowd. He calmly opened the box and removed a perfectly round hemisphere, its surface shimmering with a brilliant white light. This is the life stone we created, the life stone." Windtalker's eyes narrowed in disbelief. "That's impossible. Once solidified, the life stone will never change." "How did he manage to change its form?" Lava frowned slightly, puzzled. "I can't sense the rich natural power contained within the life stone anymore. Could it be that their frequent experiments lately have depleted its internal elemental magic? Strictly speaking, after each intense release of its catalytic and growth-promoting power, the life stone enters a long dormant period. Essentially, it needs to regenerate elemental magic, absorbing and transforming the pure magic within the magic web. But Harvey possesses a planetary-scaled energy-gathering array that connects to spatial planes, continuously drawing pure magic from the magic web. If he so desires, he can even keep the life stone in a state of continuous energy overflowing 24 hours a day. Egno didn't immediately respond to their questions, instead walking to the nursery. The entire magical potions garden was constructed from a steel frame covered in a tarpaulin made of rubber fruit. The roof was spray-painted with a magical optical camouflage, giving it a near-transparent appearance. This ensured the garden received ample sunlight while also achieving the desired greenhouse effect. Numerous small, multi-legged alchemical beasts clambered back and forth on the interlaced steel frames of the greenhouse's ceiling. They were always valuable aids to the researchers, performing many of the tedious tasks of cultivation and planting. Egno gave several alchemical beasts instructions, having them drag a grappling hook with sliding rails from the ceiling, securely suspending the semicircular lifestone from it. Several slender wires were then connected. The other end unexpectedly extended directly to underground energy pipes. A dedicated energy-focusing array beneath the garden's grounds provided heating and lighting for the greenhouse, and also met the wireless charging needs of the numerous alchemical beasts. "You intend to let the lifestone activate itself? How is that possible? Without holding it in your hand and activating it with the same natural magic, it won't react at all." Before the Windtalker could even finish his question, Egno decisively pulled the lever that recharged the pipeline. The infusion of magic was silent, but the dazzling light that erupted from the lifestone was impossible for anyone present to ignore. Instantly, an extremely rich blast of natural elemental energy engulfed the entire greenhouse. Though it was the dead of winter outside, with its heavy snow, the botanical garden erupted in a spring-like warmth and humidity, filled with an indescribable vitality. A pure-blood elf accompanying the group suddenly lost his composure. He was holding a natural magical implement made from a tree root, and under the influence of the life stone's energy, the end of the staff suddenly sprouted a cluster of tender green branches. The artifact, influenced by the life stone, experienced an uncontrolled growth-promoting resonance, which meant that the root would instantly undergo a process of sprouting, growing, blooming, and bearing fruit, before eventually withering and decaying, returning to the earth as a pile of dust. This was the natural property of the life stone, but the carelessness with which his beloved magical implement had been destroyed had caused the elf to lose control of his emotions. Meanwhile, an elderly dwarf suddenly clutched his head and cried out in pain. Dwarves in the cave city who had been widowed and had not remarried typically wore a crown of thorns to express their remembrance of their deceased partners. However, the withered crown of thorns on this dwarf's head, after being irradiated by the life stone's energy, suddenly began to revive and grow. The sharp thorns pierced his scalp, causing him to jump in pain. Seeing the situation getting slightly out of control, Egno decisively pulled the lever again, instantly halting the charging of the slender tubes. The lifestone's glow gradually dimmed, returning to its original, warm, white state. Huh? The elf raised his staff high in his hand and stepped forward with a look of excitement. Its catalytic process has been interrupted. It's been frozen in its embryonic state. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the tree root in his hand, and the cluster of tender green buds just sprouting at its end. The dwarf, with a grimace, removed the crown of thorns from his head, discovering that the once dry crown had not only sprouted many new shoots, but also several small white buds. From a distance, it looked more like a white wreath. The older dwarf seemed to be suddenly reminded of memories. Holding the crown of thorns, his eyes reddened slightly. Then, silently, he touched his chest and saluted Egno, who stood in the center of the crowd. Upon seeing this, the dwarf leader, Lava, stepped forward and said sincerely, "Your Majesty. Master Egno, I never expected you to completely decipher the secrets of the Lifestone in such a short time, truly controlling its catalytic growth-promoting process. This is truly eye-opening and astonishing." The dwarves had always thrived on the warm and humid southern coast, essentially free from any danger of food shortages. Therefore, they had no great desire for the Lifestone. After all, in a place like Hill's Breath, where the soil was sufficiently fertile, a handful of seeds sown in early spring would yield a bountiful harvest by late summer. The burrow dwarves had only suffered from a lack of education, but never from hunger. Compared to the dwarves, who merely watched the spectacle, the elves had a much more complex attitude. The hybrids they despised had actually surpassed the purebloods in the ways of nature, even successfully deciphering the ancient secrets of the Lifestone. If the Lifestone's catalytic growth-promoting process could truly be controlled, wouldn't that mean that this growth-promoting property could be applied to catalyze the growth of the golden tree? As soon as this thought occurred to Windtalker, he suddenly found his breathing quickening uncontrollably. Compared to catalyzing the golden tree they depended on for survival, the humiliation suffered by the purebloods at the hands of the hybrids was nothing, especially since the hybrids were truly exceptionally capable. Having fulfilled their promise, they chose not to retaliate by insulting the purebloods. He took a deep breath and slowly approached Egno, who wore a complex expression. He gracefully bowed slightly, touching his chest in greeting. "I beg your pardon for allowing past prejudice to blind me. You truly possess the potential of a sage, surpassing us in the practice of nature." Chapter 530 Harvest Number 1. Shortly after sending the dwarf and elf off, Harvey received the long-awaited Magic Web Express package. This was a batch of rare seeds he had ordered from the United Import and Export Company in advance of the Lifestone production plan. By the time Harvey and his personal guards arrived at the botanical garden, Egno, along with his elven apprentices and researchers, was already busy moving the newly arrived seed bags. The Lifestone, currently named Harvest Number 1, was stationed in the Botanical Garden's apothecary laboratory. Its miraculous growth-promoting abilities and controllable properties had captivated Egno, who worked tirelessly, relying on it to complete numerous previously thwarted experiments. Now, with the two magical artifacts of catalysis and reduction in his hands, he could finally, like Chris, fully unleash his talents and ambitions in magical botany and biology. Seeing Harvey appear, Egno immediately put down what he was doing, stepped forward and saluted, saying, "Your Majesty, the seeds have all been delivered. We compared them one by one with the list we gave them earlier, and basically nothing was missed." The seed list was compiled jointly with the Ministry of Agriculture, and Harvey was not involved at the time. Oh? They actually found them all? What seeds did they send? Egno did not have the common mysophobia of the elves. He rubbed his hands, squatted down, untied the sack of seeds, grabbed a handful of yellow grains from it, and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, look, this is a specialty crop that is only found in Breath of the Hills. The dwarves call it corn." Harvey nodded, picked up a seed from his hand with a complicated expression, and sighed in his heart. Isn't this the corn he was most familiar with in his previous life? Corn should have yielded significantly higher than wheat, but the dwarves clearly didn't understand fertilization and breeding, so this kernel didn't look large or plump, and even appeared slightly shriveled from improper storage. Harvey could even imagine the sparse corn kernels on the cob. It was no wonder it hadn't been widely adopted in human lands. But with the Stone of Life, that was no longer the case. If corn seeds could be successfully transformed into a cold-resistant crop, coupled with its inherent fast growth and low soil requirements, It might soon replace the enchanted wheat seeds as the staple food crop in the northern border regions. Seeing Harvey lost in thought, Egno quickly untied another sack and pulled out a fist-sized, oval-root vegetable. Your Majesty, this should look familiar to you. It's from the same family as the wild cassava found across the wastelands, but it's called a sweet potato. Harvey hummed and took it, a combination of sweet potato and taro, but rather small, each one seemingly undernourished. It's a common wild plant along the southern coast, but only picked, dug, and eaten during times of famine and war. Compared to mature potatoes, it's slightly inferior in both taste and satiety. But its advantages are equally impressive. It's equally adaptable to soil conditions, drought and cold resistant, and can be used as a supplementary crop in mountainous areas, though it doesn't hold much economic value. Before Egno could continue to introduce it to him, Harvey suddenly spotted an open sack filled with round grains. He rushed forward and grabbed a handful, saying in surprise, "They got soybeans too." Egno nodded. "Your Majesty actually knows how to call it, but people in the West prefer to call it wheat beans. Not many people grow it. This stuff can't be ground and baked like wheat. Eating too much will cause diarrhea or even poisoning." Harvey smiled bitterly and shook his head, thinking that it was because soybeans contain saponins. It seems that people in this world really cannot enjoy this high-protein, high-quality crop. All food crops are judged by whether they can be ground and baked. No wonder severe famine will break out when there is a natural disaster or war. Soybeans are not only widely cultivated as an oilseed crop, but they are also a high-quality food source rich in plant protein. Various processed soy products that don't require fermentation, such as tofu, bean sprouts, and soy milk, are highly nutritious. Fermented soybeans can also be made into a variety of delicious condiments like sauces. The soybean meal left after oil extraction is also a high-quality livestock feed and can be widely used in livestock farming, significantly reducing costs compared to feeding herds with stored wheat. Of course, these wild soybean seeds also need to be transformed by the lifestone to become highly cold-resistant crops like wheat and cassava. The corn and soybean seeds brought back from the southern border alone are enough to satisfy Harvey. These can be transformed and quickly planted on a large scale, with a significant yield expected by next autumn. Are there any other crop seeds? Harvey smiled bitterly as he watched Egnaton rummaging through the pile of sacks. If it's not a high-yield crop that can be grown on a large scale like corn and soybeans, there's no need to put too much effort into transforming it. Just keep a few samples in the botanical garden. Harvey even saw the elf apprentices digging out a bundle of wild grapevines, and even some naturally light brown cotton fruits, a new variety of tobacco leaves that are a specialty of the Western Territory, and something that looks similar to the peppers in his previous life. When he took a bite with surprise, he found that it had the same flavor and taste as a tomato, and Harvey tearfully named it chili pepper. Let the researchers and apprentices record and organize the planting methods and growth characteristics of each crop as soon as possible, mainly the two grain crops, corn and soybeans. Continue to let the United Import and Export Company send the collected seeds, and then transform them into cold-resistant grains as soon as possible. Let the Ministry of Agriculture allocate a separate experimental field and see the situation after sowing. Egno held a booklet and recorded Harvey's work instructions personally, and wondered, "Your Majesty, the Stone of Life, is it only used to catalyze and transform grain seeds? Will it be? Wouldn't it be a bit too wasteful? If such a magical growth-promoting device is used to catalyze the rapid growth of those rare potion plants, not only the territory's medical hospital and the Potions Research Institute, but even high-end research departments such as the Magic Academy and the Alchemy Laboratory will benefit greatly." Harvey certainly understood Egno's intention. He sighed and patted his shoulder. "I plan to use the first life stone only to catalyze ordinary crops. After all, food is the foundation of our development. But there is no need to be discouraged. The elves and dwarves already know that we have the technology to control the life stone. If they want to exchange this technology from us, then they must continuously provide us with the raw materials for making lifestone, golden tree hearts and earth crystal cores. As long as the core technology is in his own hands, Harvey is not worried that the development of the research department will be restricted." Chapter 531 Demonic Grain Seeds. Harvey had recently appointed Minister of Agriculture, Ambich Kenny, and had been urgently summoned back to Spark City from the South Slope base. This impromptu meeting was attended only by a few senior officials from the City Hall. The remainder consisted of lower-level agricultural staff. The meeting took place not in Harvey's castle, but, for the first time, in the greenhouses adjacent to the Ministry of Agriculture's experimental fields. The early arrivals were forced to hunch over the greenhouses, whispering to each other as they awaited the arrival of His Majesty, the presiding officer. Fortunately, the falling snow did not hinder Harvey's progress. Less than a quarter of an hour later, he arrived in his alchemical vehicle and led everyone into the greenhouses without a word. After raising his hand to signal for silence, Harvey cleared his throat and said, "Today's impromptu meeting is of great significance, but let's be brief. First, let Egno from the Botanical Research Institute introduce you to our recently developed magical grain seeds." Egno hurried forward and, with the help of researchers and apprentices, lifted the optical tarp covering the experimental nursery. "Please look, everyone. These are the first batch of seedlings catalyzed by this new grain seed. We've simulated the temperature and humidity in the greenhouse to that of late winter and early spring. After sowing, the seeds successfully broke through the soil and germinated in less than a week." Ambachi was stunned and exclaimed, "Temperatures in late winter and early spring? The snow on the wasteland hasn't even completely melted yet, and these new grain seeds can actually germinate and grow." Spring plowing in the Northern Territories has always begun in nearly a month later than south of the Divine Ridge Mountains. This is primarily because, even with agricultural alchemists capable of tilling the frozen soil, sown grain seeds simply cannot germinate in these temperatures. The Eastern Basin, surrounded by mountains and enjoying a warmer climate, is somewhat more resilient. Spring plowing can begin roughly the same time as in the Southern Territories. Egno nodded and continued, "Furthermore, this new crop of grains offers the advantages of a shorter growth cycle and higher yields per plant. After repeated growth promotion testing, the yield per plant of these experimental fields can double that of previous enchanted grains, while also inheriting their cold and drought resistance." Previous enchanted grains were entirely handcrafted by hybrid elves like Egno through the use of nature-based magic. Not only was the seed supply limited, but the enchanted effects gradually faded over time. They could only meet the planting needs of Spark City and the East Expansion Base, and were ultimately unsuitable for expansion into the wider Southern Territories. A group of officials from the Ministry of Agriculture gasped in surprise. The agricultural official from Grizzly Territory asked tremblingly, "In the past, we have already adopted a 2-crop-a-year model. If the growth cycle of the new grain can be shortened, then, wouldn't that mean, yes, the warmer the climate, the faster the growth cycle? If managed properly, the southern region can basically achieve 3 harvests a year." Among all the agricultural officials present to rush back from various places to report on their work, only the local agricultural officials in Xinghuo City had the most profound understanding of enchanted grain seeds. The Xinghuo City State Farm and the Dongchuo Base alone could produce nearly 100,000 bushels of grain, which was more abundant than the entire grain output of any major country in the southern border. It was because of the high yield of enchanted grain seeds that Xinghuo City, a pioneering city isolated in the northern border, could actually support nearly 100,000 urban residents. Gazing at the excited crowd, Harvey quickly stepped forward to dampen their enthusiasm. "This new grain seed, named Harvest Number 1, isn't without flaws, so don't get too excited. Let Egno explain it in detail." Egno had his apprentice bring a bag of grain seeds, then lean over and uprooted a young plant. He patiently explained, "Unlike the enchanted grain seeds of the past, the magic contained in Harvest Number 1 seeds won't fade. From the moment they sprout to the moment they wither and decay, the magic must cycle through an entire cycle before it completely dissipates. Therefore, the seed's properties can't be inherited. It can only be planted once, and harvested quickly at maturity. Otherwise, there's a risk of nothing." The officials fell silent. This meant that every harvest had to be rushed, a race against time. Without the use of large agricultural alchemy beasts, it would be impossible to achieve with human labor alone. Furthermore, enchanted grain seeds were a one-time product, requiring new ones to be obtained annually from the higher-level agricultural department at the municipal hall. If seed reserves were limited, remote administrative areas might not even receive seed for planting. Harvey looked around and noticed that most of the officials from other regions looked nervous and anxious. He chuckled and added, "Don't worry about seed supply. Every year when spring plowing is assigned, the Ministry of Agriculture will allocate a quantity of seed equal to your assigned target." The perceived disadvantage of not being able to save seeds for replanting was actually a reasonable control measure for Spark City. Once this high-yielding, fast-growing grain seed became widespread throughout St. Valen, all the previously extensively cultivated common wheat crops would be rapidly eliminated. Municipal administrative agencies throughout the country would then be able to monopolize grain sales by controlling the seed supply. For Harvey, this was equivalent to directly controlling the entire country's population and labor force. The agricultural official from Fingigan City raised his hand cautiously. Your Majesty, can wheat grown from magically catalyzed seeds truly be sustainable for long-term consumption? This was the primary concern of most Southern Territory officials. After all, they had only recently joined Harvey's ranks and were still unfamiliar with and intimidated by the sophisticated magical technology of Spark City. Naturally, they wouldn't dare disobey when a magical spear pointed at their heads. But now that they were on the same page, some officials with a strong sense of responsibility were emerging, gradually becoming aware of the issue of food safety. Harvey was actually quite pleased with their doubts and concerns, as it only served to demonstrate that the new age officials he had personally selected were completely different from the old aristocrats of the past. Don't worry. All enchanted grains, from the most common wheat and barley to the soybeans, corn, and sweet potatoes that will be mandatory for promotion, are essentially the same as ordinary crops, Harvey explained patiently. Magic only acts as a catalyst to promote growth. The matured products themselves contain no magic. The bread, pancakes, and oatmeal consumed daily by nearly 100,000 people in Spark City, and the processed foods shipped endlessly to the southern border, are all products of enchanted grains. In this benighted world where nearly half the population still struggles to get enough to eat, there's no room for concern about the merits of natural versus genetically modified foods. Ensuring the survival of those struggling with hunger and poverty is the most important and meaningful priority. Furthermore, these officials, of ordinary backgrounds, had no idea how magic could transform or how natural elements could promote plant growth. There was no need to explain in detail how the life stone, through magical programming, continuously enchanted and solidified the grains. So he simply simplified the explanation of the problem, and roughly explained it by saying, they look no different from ordinary food, and they taste no different, which means they are no different, and 100,000 people in Xinghuo City are eating them, and nothing happened to them. I also ate them, and nothing happened to me. The vast number of real cases in front of him were the best proof. Chapter 532, Store Food. Seeing that everyone no longer had any doubts about the food safety of the demonized grain seeds, Harvey slowed down and continued, as I said just now, the amount of grain seeds will be allocated accordingly according to the planting tasks assigned to you each year. Similarly, the agricultural machinery and technicians who assist you in planting and production will also be assigned to various places. As long as you are serious enough about this matter, I believe that most people will not be put on probation or directly demoted for failing to complete the tasks as before. The agricultural officials of Fingigan City and Grizzly Territory could not help but shudder. The chief executives of the two places, the vassal nobles headed by Earl Fagan, were punished with probation because they failed to meet the production targets in previous years. This was entirely the result of Harvey's lenient punishment of the two men in consideration of some obstacles. In addition, grain transactions in all regions must be strictly controlled, and no individual is allowed to sell grain privately. Even for land that has not yet been nationalized, ordinary grain grown by farmers or free farmers must be sold to the city hall first. It is strictly forbidden to sell it to foreign grain traders, and not even a grain of wheat is allowed to be shipped out of the country. Of course, if farmers and free farmers strictly abide by the regulations, Harvey will naturally allocate magical grain seeds to them as appropriate, so that these individual business owners can also enjoy high-yield planting income. A finance ministry official pondered for a moment, then said doubtfully, Your Majesty, if the yield of harvest number 1 grain truly doubles, it will be more than enough to feed our people. If the grain is distributed to private individuals for cultivation, and all purchased without export, our financial pressure will be enormous. Unless we use gold and yuan banknotes, Harvey interrupted him with a wave of his hand and said decisively, the issue of currency unification will be discussed after I officially ascend the throne, but a ban on grain exports must be implemented immediately. Aside from the processed food export orders previously signed by Spark City, neither the City Hall nor private individuals are allowed to sell domestically produced grain to foreign chambers of commerce. The specific laws and regulations have been drafted. If you have any questions, please go to the Ministry of Justice for details. While everyone was discussing the grain embargo regulations in a low voice again, Ambichikeni leaned close to Harvey's ear and whispered, Your Majesty, if we hadn't temporarily built a warehouse after the autumn harvest this year, we would almost not be able to store so much grain. We will have to continue to purchase from the public, and the output of harvest number 1 will double. I'm afraid the storage pressure will be very high. Besides, we can't eat so much grain at all. Isn't it necessary? According to his idea, the Ministry of Agriculture should actually turn to developing some cash crops and breeding industries, which can not only meet the consumption of the domestic population, but also export large quantities to foreign countries and earn real foreign exchange income. Harvey patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, then continue building warehouses. Not just in Spark City, but also in Grizzly Fort, Fingian City, and Jinhu City. Send all this surplus grain there for storage. The shepherd knight was slightly taken aback. Store it all? Yes, all of this is for the upcoming alien invasion, Harvey said seriously. You are one of the senior officials who are aware of the situation. You should understand the true intentions of the city hall and me. Ambush's face darkened, and he bowed solemnly to Harvey, no longer trying to sell his majesty on his economic farming income-generating plan. The vast majority of the officials present had been born in a peaceful era, free from alien invasion. While political wars between the nobles continued, they were never brutal wars of genocide. Although they had been indoctrinated into the terrifying truth of alien invasion and, under the arrangement of the city hall, had lined up to see the specimens and live captives of the demon lizardmen firsthand, just like they were visiting alien creatures, they had never developed a collective sense of security. This was entirely due to blind confidence in Harvey and Spark City's power. A massive army, completely loyal and powerful, groundbreaking magical weapons, and tens of thousands of alchemical beasts capable of supporting combat. If Harvey so desired, the force he commanded could easily sweep across the central kingdoms of the Southern Territory, even the holy city of Gorus. A distant northern alien race? The demon lizardmen? Just another target for the Northern Army to exploit. But Harvey was different. As a time traveler, he too had come of age in peacetime, but his past life had taught him what happened to a vast nation and people during a protracted and brutal war. Therefore, he could only prepare for war based on historical experience. Harvey envisioned the worst-case scenario: the Divine Spine Mountains, once considered a formidable barrier by humans, would be breached at every turn, leaving the demon lizardmen, along with the demons and evil beastmen, to invade the Southern Territory with unstoppable force. Within 3 months, the entire Southern Territory would be engulfed in war. By that time, he asserted that no nation, save the magical capital of Alay and St. Valen, which he controlled, could withstand such an invasion. His precious population would plummet. Even if St. Valen joined forces with Alay and the 7 wizarding nations to build a defense and shelter the inhabitants, vast tracts of farmland in the southern border would be left barren. Without enough food reserves to sustain hundreds of thousands of people for 2 or 3 years, the entire human kingdom would quickly collapse, and the so-called United Front would fall apart. Hulled grains like wheat, with the advanced underground storage technology of the burrowing dwarves from Breath of the Hills, could be stored for nearly 5 years. While the taste and flavor would be greatly diminished, at least they would ensure a full stomach. Corn, soybeans, and sweet potatoes, which had shorter storage periods, were gradually promoted as supplementary grains that could be sold immediately after production. With sufficient soybeans as feed, livestock farming could be developed simultaneously, making them crucial cash crops, just like sugar and salt crops. Most of the officials Harvey summoned to the greenhouse test field today were high-ranking officials, well aware of the dangers of alien invasion. Even without Harvey's explicit instructions, many had already grasped the underlying strategy: the grain embargo, official purchases, new grain varieties, and extensive storage. These were all war preparedness plans His Majesty had drawn up long in advance to prepare for the impending war. Naturally, no one dared to question a matter so crucial to the survival and vital interests of their tribe. While most of these officials, who came from minor noble or commoner backgrounds, had previously been frustrated, they weren't short-sighted and ignorant without ideals. Now, having wielded a degree of power through their attachment to and loyalty to Harvey, they were naturally firmly on board and began to offer their best efforts. Your Majesty, the harvest number 1 wheat seed can be promoted in a limited way in the plains. In mountainous and hilly areas like Grizzly Territory, we can consider planting corn and sweet potatoes. Yes, it is recommended to mix beans and wheat in the Jinhu City area. The canals and irrigation systems built by the old nobles in the past can fully meet the needs of large-scale planting, as Dallin and Urt whispered to each other, and also suggested to Harvey. Your Majesty, We hope to offer agricultural courses in both public colleges and spellcaster colleges, so that both ordinary civilian students and natural spellcasters can learn and master agricultural planting techniques. This is a plan that Dallin and Erd have been trying to promote. It is to completely transform the spellcasters trained by Starfire City into practical magic, science and engineering talents through the integration of disciplines, and directly break the tradition that spellcasters used to be high-handed and only focused on themselves. Arturo, the Dean of the Academy of Magical Sciences, wasn't at the meeting today, but Harvey believed he had contributed significantly to this matter. Compared to orthodox spellcasters, necromancers were probably the most eager to break with tradition and achieve equality. Harvey nodded meaningfully and smiled. That's a good suggestion, but we'll have to wait until I'm officially crowned before we can discuss it. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 533, Coronation. Nearly a month after the winter festival and military parade concluded, the coronation celebrations for the new king of the Principality of St. Valen and the northern wastes finally began in the coldest depths of winter. Spark City had been quietly preparing for this unprecedented ceremony all winter. The Lord's Castle, where Harvey lived, had been officially designated the Central Royal Palace District after nearly 6 months of renovations by the Ministry of Construction. Although the castle had not been renovated or expanded at His Majesty's insistence, the King's Square in front of it had already been revamped, capable of accommodating thousands of people for the ceremony. The Central Royal Palace District was fully open for the duration of the celebration, with numerous patrol officers and robotic guards maintaining order and directing the flow of people. Thousands of Pioneer Territory natives, armed with their first-generation identity cards, were fortunate enough to be able to witness the ceremony in person. Many arrived before dawn, dressed in their finest attire, gathering in King's Square in anticipation, eagerly awaiting the coronation. For the Wastelanders, this was the first king, no, emperor, to emerge from the bitter cold lands they had inhabited for millennia. The vast wastelands north of the Godspeed Mountains were so vast that no powerful kingdom in the south could rival them in terms of land area. A king capable of expanding territory and protecting his people in such a barren land naturally stood apart from the southern royalty who relied on bloodlines and inheritance to maintain their rule. Only the title of emperor, held by the Pope of the Holy City of Goris, whose glory spread far and wide and who ruled over all nations on behalf of the gods, could truly match the status of a great monarch in their minds. Petitions requesting that Harvey be crowned emperor at his coronation ceremony flooded into the castle office and study, and City Hall received countless letters. Many Wastelanders-born officials openly expressed their political stance. The title of Emperor of the North should be prioritized over the throne of Grand Duke St. Valen. While the intelligence services were undoubtedly behind this, the public's enthusiastic response was truly unexpected. Even many residents originally from the Southern Territory privately considered it perfectly reasonable, seemingly completely forgetting that, ever since the rise of the Faith of Glory, the Southern Territory's human race had always had only one emperor, residing in the holy city of Goris. Heavy snowflakes still drifted from the sky. Long, black banners with gold edging hung from the towering castle walls. Thick steel cables pulled more than a dozen airships into the air. Their massive airships, adorned with the silhouette of the castle and the emblem of a lance and golden star intertwined, stood out even in the snowy daylight, visible to nearly everyone in the city. The castle terrace, where Harvey usually gave public speeches, was now adorned with countless flowers from the botanical garden's greenhouse. 2 alchemical beast guards, over 3 meters tall in specially painted gold, stood solemnly on either side of the terrace. Without a doubt, everyone knew that their Majesty would complete his coronation ceremony here. Your Majesty? Your Majesty, Captain Tommy urged in a low voice, are you ready? Reiner and Mr. Dallin are waiting at the end of the corridor. Officials, ministers, and foreign guests have also gathered in the meeting hall on the first floor, waiting for you to come. Yes, I see, Harvey responded softly, walking to the dressing mirror to re-examine his clothes. He was still wearing the same outfit with a strong local style that he had worn on the day of the founding of Starfire City, but in his hand he now held a short scepter and a palm-sized 3-dimensional square golden seal. According to Dallin, Arturo, and others, who were originally from aristocratic wizard families, A Grand Duke or King crowned by the Pope only needs to wear a crown during the coronation ceremony. However, if the Pope himself is crowning, he must also hold the imperial seal, symbolizing the rule of all nations, to emphasize the difference in status between emperor and secular kings. However, considering that Harvey is a spellcaster, he neither seeks recognition from the church nor possesses the blessing of royal blood. To highlight his equally noble status as a spellcaster, he naturally needs to be equipped with a scepter of truth, symbolizing his pursuit of truth and his wisdom in controlling magic. This resulted in a unique coronation ceremony where Harvey was completely stitched with buffs stacked on top of each other. Since this was unprecedented and no one dared to openly criticize or oppose him, they were naturally free to act as they pleased. Pushing open the living room door, Harvey slowly walked down the corridor to the end of the descending staircase. Two towering alchemical creations, a blend of brass and silver, stood silently there. They were Reiner and Isdalen. The two alchemical creations, their eyes flickering with soul fire, knelt on one knee in salute to Harvey. They each received the scepter of truth and the imperial seal from Harvey, holding them solemnly in their hands before heading downstairs. As they descended the stairs and entered the hall, the once bustling, vast hallway fell silent. Most of the people bowed their heads, one hand on their chests, and saluted, respectfully welcoming their majesty. Only Pierce, standing like a spear at the entrance of the staircase, held his head high, his gaze fixed firmly and intensely upon Harvey's slowly descending form. His right hand, loosely gripping the commander's sword at his waist, trembled slightly with emotion. The crowd automatically split into two columns, clearing a path for Harvey. On the left, led by Reiner, were officials from the Spark City Municipal Office. Below them were representatives from various key departments, including the Alchemy Laboratory, the Academy of Magical Sciences, and the Police Department. On the right, representatives from the military hierarchy were present. With the exception of Wayne and Dave, who were unable to return from the Isengard expedition, the majority of senior officers from Pearson below were present. The Northern Army, the Defense Forces, the General Staff. Even the naval officers from the Ice Sea Fleet, independently organized by Harvey himself, were present, dressed in dark blue uniforms. According to custom in the Southern Realms, the coronation ceremony for a king was a complex and tedious process. Many kings and grand dukes even had to travel to the Holy City to await the Pope's approval before they could be considered legitimate successors to the throne. However, for the North and St. Valen, Harvey's reign was already undisputed, requiring no further approval. Therefore, the entire ceremony was drastically simplified and streamlined. Harvey walked straight through the crowd, ascending the steps to the throne at the head of the hall. A resplendent golden crown rested on the throne. No ceremonial officer or priest offered assistance. Harvey bent down, lifted the crown with both hands, and placed it directly on his head. He then turned and took the imperial seal and scepter of truth from Reiner and Isdalen. Pierce, standing at the bottom of the steps, drew his commander's sword with a swish and shouted, "Long live His Majesty!" Everyone knelt on one knee. "Long live His Majesty!" Amidst the roaring chants, Harvey did not ascend the throne. Instead, carrying the scepter and seal, he, flanked by several high-ranking officials, ascended to the castle's second-floor garden terrace. The king's square below the castle erupted in thunderous cheers. Dozens of cannons stationed in the castle's back gardens blazed in perfect time, their booming sound resonating through the heavens. Harvey raised his hands in a gesture to the assembled spectators, and those who had been waiting in the square for a long time unleashed their excitement. "Long live His Majesty! Long live His Majesty! Long live the North! Long live Spark City!" Cheers, mixed with a relentless roar of cannonballs, soared into the heavens, shaking the distant mountains with their reverberations. A chill wind, whirling snowflakes, carried the flowers and ribbons adorning the castle terraces onto the square, prompting countless people to leap to their feet, as if this would forever preserve the blessings and glory of today's celebration. From the vast, endless walls that encircled Spark City, the roar of cannons echoed at intervals. The rhythmic melody of the military band mingled with the tolling of bells from the city square, carried through countless alchemical loudspeakers to the sprawling city of 100,000 people. It officially announced to all the people, the North had its first emperor. Chapter 534 The Emperor's Gift. Scorching Lord Chemosalis closed the crystal screen of the magic brain instrument with a sigh, turned to Soul Reaper Soren Dawson, who was also one of the three chiefs, and sighed. He officially declared his coronation in the North. "The news came from the Jinhu City Federation branch half an hour ago," Dawson rubbed his red rosacea and said worriedly, "So soon? I thought he would wait until all the church forces in the central part of the South Territory were completely wiped out before choosing. Mr. Agent is not a fool. Don't forget who is standing behind him." Salas shook his head and interrupted Dawson's words. "Do you think he really doesn't know that we are using him to weaken the church power for the Federation?" Seeing Dawson silent, Salas continued, "Fortunately, we have always followed the principle of equal exchange and have never let him suffer unilateral losses in anything. As long as our relationship does not become hostile, his existence will always be beneficial to us and has no harm." The figure of Shadow Knight Gallagher loomed faintly in the silver dressing mirror standing nearby. This young spellcaster, newly crowned emperor and the real-world agent of the Demon Network Forum, has risen incredibly fast. 4 or 5 years ago, he was a low-level mage at a certain undead spellcasting academy in St. Valen. Seemingly overnight, for unknown reasons, he was suddenly invited to join the Demon Network Forum as a high-level spellcaster, and was soon chosen by the mysterious entity behind the forum as its sole real-world agent. Since then, his growth has been astonishing, almost unbelievable. Not only can he defeat high-level battle mages of the same level head-on with his own spellcasting research, he has also created several unprecedented high-level spells. His creation, the Lance of Annihilation, has directly helped the Federation turn the tide of the war, driving the demons back north of the Evil Moon Mountains and even capturing the central fortress on the front lines. If it weren't for Serath's unique and peculiar detection skills, which had silently detected Harvey several times since their initial encounter in LA, they would have suspected that Harvey had been possessed by some ancient demon or otherworldly monster, possessing his body and soul, becoming its puppet in the real world. His actions and behavior were truly utterly unlike any other independent spellcaster, leaving them completely unpredictable. As an independent spellcaster, he was keen to engage in secular power struggles. Not only did he forge a path to the far north to open up new lands, he actually managed to establish a foothold in the perilous wasteland and rapidly grow in strength, until he possessed the terrifying power to launch a counterattack in the south and ultimately control all of St. Valen. Just from his attitude and actions towards the people under his rule, you can tell that he has not betrayed his own people, selling his soul or anything else to some existence in exchange for the development and growth of strength. Salas found it more and more funny. Take his coronation ceremony for example. Tell me, which human king in history would set up his capital in the wasteland north of the Divine Spine Mountains, and insisted on being crowned in the dead of winter with raging winds and snow? Dawson interrupted unhappily, "What's so strange about that? This guy is just showing off. Showing off that even in the winter in the north, no one in his territory will die of cold and hunger, and they can even happily sing and dance to participate in his coronation ceremony." "Salas, he is much more arrogant than you were when you were young," Gallagher frowned and said in a deep voice. "His actions like this, and all the subsequent arrangements, make me more and more convinced that the ancient rumors of the invasion of northern alien races may really be coming soon." Before Serath and Dawson could respond, several figures suddenly appeared at the entrance to the underground mine caverns. Several high-ranking members of the Federation were using flight techniques to rapidly descend from the surface to the depths of the mine, reaching the core area where Serath was cloistered. Dawson stood up, somewhat displeased, and berated them. "You know this place is completely sealed off, the chief's secret retreat, yet you still brazenly enter from the surface? Afraid those church spies hiding in a lair won't catch a glimpse, right?" The chief's disappearance and subsequent escape into the underground aftermath had been known only to a handful of high-ranking officials within the Federation. Furthermore, given his ability to utilize the spirit-wandering technique to briefly visit the aerial realm in his avatar form, few noticed anything amiss for a long time. However, the underground mineral veins lay outside the magical capital. If word of Serath's presence were to leak, there was no guarantee the church would dare risk a catastrophe by dispatching a large number of demon slayers and high-ranking priests to launch a simultaneous attack from both the magic network and reality. The team was led by the typically calm and composed high-ranking mage, Friend Shield McCollin. His companions were all trusted colleagues from the Ministry of Magic who shared his views. Three chiefs, McCollin, in a rare moment of loss of composure, had clearly forced his magical energy several times during the high-speed flight, repeatedly increasing his speed without regard for the cost. This was the reason he couldn't even breathe steadily after landing. Several of his lieutenants clearly lacked his magical reserves. Many paled the moment they landed, their mana drained and their minds weakened. Dawson reprimanded him, but his body remained true. He quickly used his immense mental power to draw the mana that had escaped from the mineral veins into reality, slowly channeling it to the others, accelerating their recovery. Macabre was the first to stabilize himself. After bowing, he spoke solemnly, "Three chiefs. Mr. Kilthuzad," he suddenly passed through the magical network and sent me, a frozen, living alien. "What?" Salas asked, puzzled. "A frozen alien? What kind of alien? What does he mean? Have they developed a new anti-magic weapon against demons?" Gallagher's expression grew excited even through the silver mirror. He even stood up and pressed himself close to the mirror, as if he were about to burst through it and into reality. Fashield shook his head, as if recalling the fear and surprise when he just received the thing, and said in a trembling voice, "It's not a demon. It's not any alien race we know of." Mr. Kilthuzad said in the message attached to the letter, that this is an alien race he captured from the far north, thousands of miles away in the Arctic ice sea, from the center of the continent. Dawson took a step forward, and several invisible hands suddenly grabbed the collars of several high-level people and lifted them up out of thin air. These were obviously not the hands of an ordinary wizard. At least with Fashield's ability, he couldn't break free from the restraints in a short time. "What nonsense are you talking about? The far north, thousands of miles away? Captured aliens?" Dawson's voice became softer and softer as he pressed the issue, until he seemed to gradually believe it. "Really? The ancient rumors about aliens are true. He actually traveled thousands of miles to verify them, and he actually captured a living one." Sarath suddenly felt that something was amiss and said in a deep voice, "Why did he choose to send a living alien to you? And then you told us." Fadden was stunned for a moment, and said hesitantly, "Chief, I acted on my own initiative. Mr. Kilthuzad originally planned to hand the living alien over to me, and then disclose it directly to the Federation through the Ministry of Magical Affairs, but I'm worried." Gallagher tapped a few times through the mirror and said dimly, "You're right. Mr. Agent obviously intends to bypass the three of us and directly deal a drastic measure to the Federation, which is full of factions and internal conflicts. An unusually crude but effective method." Sarah sighed deeply and said, "But this will directly exacerbate the internal conflicts within the Federation, and even lead to an irreversible split. Mr. Agent may want to see this situation. He wants to rebuild a new Federation, from the ruins of the divided Federation to unite and resist alien invasion." Chapter 535 Thought Invasion. The frozen living alien was silently transported to the chief's private laboratory atop the sky domain. Mage shield friend Macabre paced anxiously until Chief Dawson successfully unleashed his soul-wandering technique, drawing Sarath Savadar to the area. The towering figure of the Scorching Lord gradually materialized, his body gradually solidifying from illusion into solid form, enveloped in a capacious chief robe. Without deliberate detection, no one would have noticed him, a projection of his avatar, freely moving through the sky domain's mage tower. Except for those present here, no one else knows the news about the living aliens, right? Dawson touched his nose and muttered, "Probably not. There are not many conservative members in the Ministry of Magical Affairs, and most of them have been squeezed into marginal positions by this guy Macabre. They rarely even have the opportunity to return to the Sky region on weekdays." As soon as these words came out, Fadden immediately lowered his head in embarrassment. After all, Dawson is actually the nominal spiritual leader of the conservative faction, but compared to the heads of various departments who hold real power below, as the chief, he puts the overall interests of the Federation first most of the time. His stance is not completely biased towards the conservatives, and he will not choose to actively connect with the church in order to suppress other factions. The giant, pupilless face of Tower Spirit Enzo slowly emerged on the ceiling, and he chuckled in a strange tone, "Don't worry, I personally transported the living body to the top of the tower, and no one dared to intercept it rashly. However, when it just arrived at the Affairs Department, it was secretly targeted by several waves of people." Fadden's spirit tensed up, and he hurriedly asked, "Sir Enzo, are you an internal staff of the Affairs Department?" But the sealed box of the living body has not been opened. Enzo's illusory face twisted for a moment, and he slowly said, "The sealed magic contract attached by the minister himself will naturally not be opened easily. I just want to remind you that every time something is sent from the north, it will attract the attention of certain people." Seeing that Enzo was still nagging, Dawson said impatiently, "Okay, now is not the time to discuss internal struggles. Enzo has sealed the laboratory on the top of the tower, let's open the box immediately." He turned to look at Salas, who stood silently by his side. Then, with a flick of his finger, He silently opened the massive sealed box on the lab table. The shards of the box, along with the sealed magical contract attached to it, instantly disintegrated and crumbled, falling to the ground in a heap of dust. Salus's gaze narrowed, his breathing suddenly rapid. He transformed into a shadowy figure and flashed to the lab table, looking at the frozen creature lying quietly on the surface. This is truly an alien creature I've never seen before. Although its appearance and limbs are extremely similar to ours, Fadden recalled the instruction manual for the living creature that Harvey had sent along with the goods. He quickly stepped forward, activated a magical brain device, and retrieved it from his forum account, imploring the two chiefs to review it. Suddenly, a slightly unhappy cough was heard from the corner of the wall. Fadden was stunned for a moment, and when he turned around, he found that Lord Gallagher had appeared in the familiar silver full-length mirror at some point, looking at him with a gloomy face. The sensible Minister of Magic immediately stepped forward and moved the mirror to the place closest to the experimental table and the magic brain instrument. Tisk tisk tisk, this guy Kilthuzid. He actually ambushed an alien outpost in the Arctic Ocean and brought back 3 of them alive. He has already dissected the other 2. Dawson touched his nose, feeling a little amused. The data from the autopsy experiment is already very detailed. Even if we repeat the verification, we won't get any more information. Did he send a living person here just to expose the historical truth and warn the Federation? Gallagher stood in front of the mirror without any image, frowned and said in a deep voice, I want to contact Mr. Agent separately and find a way to obtain video footage of their head-on battle with these demon lizardmen. These aliens are weird enough just from the text description. Their bodies are resistant to magic, their blackwater weapons can be transformed at will and controlled remotely, and they don't have any detectable magic fluctuations. No matter how you look at it, they look like combat units that are naturally restrained against spellcasters, which makes Gallagher, who is in charge of the Federation's Mage Corps, extremely alert. Sareth, who had been silent until then, suddenly spoke up, but they don't seem to have much resistance against Mr. Agent's mortal army. This means that magical weapons like the Lance of Oblivion are effective against these enemies, Shield explained quietly. Mr. Kilthuzid isn't sending mortal troops, but rather his own bloodline warriors. I hear they were all high-level awakened, and the power is comparable to our lead mage chapter. Gallagher's face darkened, so it's even more important to understand their fighting methods. Before he could finish, the magic brain began to beep again, signaling a single message from Kilthuzid, sending a simultaneous message to the 3 chiefs. Kilthuzid, my lords, I assume Mr. Shield has already informed you of the living alien. Please do not use that living creature for dissection yet. I have something more important that I need your assistance with. Dawson crossed his arms and glared at Shield, telling him to sit down at the magic brain and act as a typist for the 3. Foul Shield, we've just sent a living specimen to the lab, but your initial experimental data is already quite detailed. We're also considering what valuable information we can extract from it. Kilthuzid, from a purely practical perspective, there's indeed no more information to be mined from the flesh and blood of the demon lizardmen. However, we haven't yet successfully deciphered their language, writing, or communication methods, which means our understanding of these alien races remains superficial. Dawson poked Foulshield impatiently, saying, let him speak directly. What cooperation do you need from us? Foulshield quickly typed away, gritting his teeth. Kilthuzid, first, we need Chief Gallagher to send forces deep into the western reaches north of the Godspeed Mountains. By any means, we must explore as far north as possible, past the demon-controlled areas. Ordinary spellcasters skilled in flight might not be able to do this easily, but I will provide you with some flying vehicles. Simply adding some colleagues skilled in stealth to the exploration team will ensure the safety of the expedition. Gallagher tapped the mirror excitedly. Brilliant suggestion. He wants us to advance from the west and see if any traces of the demon lizardmen appear in the ICC north of the western front. From there, we can deduce the approximate direction of their main invasion. Salus turned to look at the mirror and said, we'd have to cross the demon defenses in controlled areas, which is extremely risky. Can your people do it? Gallagher pondered for a moment, then nodded. Don't worry. My high-level battle mages have already riddled the demon defenses north of the Evil Moon Mountains. If Mr. Agent can provide a few of his airships, it will be an even greater boost to our exploration mission. Kilthuzid, my second request is to Lord Dawson. The lizardmen do not have the talent to control magic power, so the corresponding magic patterns or blood cores cannot be detected in the magic network. If you want to extract their mental power or memory for interpretation, the best way is to let Lord Dawson use his soul-sucking technique, use the curse seed to deeply parasitize them, and then take advantage of their mental weakness after awakening them to instantly launch a mind invasion. It is too crazy and risky to carry out a mind invasion on an alien race that is completely impossible to communicate with. Faden felt cold sweat on his forehead and back, and his hands were placed on the keyboard of the magic brain instrument, at a loss. Mr. Harvey was so bold that he actually asked a legendary chief to conduct such a dangerous mind invasion experiment for him. Dawson, however, remained undeterred. He rubbed his reddened nose and chuckled. This little fellow is sensible. He knows that with his advanced abilities, mind invasion is too dangerous, but for a legendary spellcaster, it's not that difficult. The only danger of mind invasion is the risk of being lost in the sea of collective consciousness, connecting the target to their tribe. But if Dawson were to perform this, he could cleverly sever the target's thoughts and memories from that sea of consciousness, transforming the turbulent, deep ocean into a swimming pool in his own backyard, allowing him to swim freely in it. Chapter 536 Wandering in the Abyss. Soren Dawson opened his eyes and tumbled off his soft, hay-strewn bed. Looking around, he found himself in a small, enclosed barn. This was where he'd spent his childhood. The ground floor housed many lambs and poultry, while a small mezzanine above served as a haven for young Dawson during his nights on duty. This barn served as a buffer zone within his consciousness, shielding him from the psychic intrusions of his own mind and ensuring his own safety. He skillfully pushed open the barn door, surrounded by warm, golden sunlight. Only a small pond, 10 steps in front of him, seemed out of place amidst the peaceful countryside. The pond was remarkably calm, even a gentle breeze barely stirred it, and not a single duck or goose roamed the surface. In fact, the bottom seemed almost indecipherable, like a completely solidified, murky crystal. Dawson, unfazed, hummed a tuneless country tune as he circled the pond. Then, squatting down and rolling up his trouser legs, he dove in and sank rapidly, disappearing from the surface in an instant. Dark, murky, cold, and an unstoppable descent. Undeterred, Dawson opened his eyes and surveyed his surroundings, his gaze instantly captivated by the scene before him. He was now in the murky, deep blue sea, as if plummeting from a towering cliff. To his side lay the solid, obsidian walls, while below, due to the murky water, only a faint, flickering glow could be seen from the dark red cracks. It seemed to be lava flowing from an underwater volcano below. Dawson suddenly understood. No wonder the black cliffs were slightly circular. Though the end seemed in sight, the vague shape of a vast underwater crater was still apparent. These demon lizardmen truly lived within the bottomless icy sea. It seemed Harvey's intelligence was accurate. They were indeed using these temporary vents formed by submarine volcanic eruptions, breaking through the ice, to reach land. Dawson couldn't help but feel a little proud at the thought. Harvey had reportedly developed an alchemical submersible capable of navigating the deep sea, but he could guarantee it couldn't even reach the depths of such abyssal depths. From the moment he entered the target's consciousness, he had been plummeting uncontrollably, indicating that this location was at least 10,000 meters below sea level. Of course, the massive submarine crater wasn't all he saw. As he approached the crater's base, stone structures began to appear on the circular cliff face. Their design was unlike any known terrestrial structures, more like the cocoons of insects pupating. The further he went, the more they appeared. They were densely packed against the black cliff face, their number too numerous to count. Could these cocoon-like structures be the dwellings of the demon lizardmen? Dawson couldn't help but marvel. He'd thought a mind invasion would directly connect his consciousness to the target's final battle and capture, allowing him to experience firsthand the combat styles of these strange enemies and how they communicated with one another. Instead, he'd plunged headfirst into their lair. Strangely enough, it was utterly silent here, with no sign of any lizard folk activity at all. How could this fragment of memory he'd cut from the sea of collective consciousness not reveal a single living alien? Should he immediately ascend and detach, or remain where he was and wait for changes? Before Dawson could make a decision, the entire crater suddenly began to vibrate slightly. This wasn't the underground commotion of lava gushing before an eruption, but some kind of perfectly regular resonance. Suddenly, the giant cocoon clinging to the cliff beside him silently cracked, and a deformed figure, with long, twisted limbs, resembling a humanoid spider, slowly crawled out. Then, more cocoons ruptured in resonance, and tens of thousands of humanoid spiders emerged. Their flat, featureless faces seemed to sniff for a moment before swiftly swarming along the cliff wall toward the bottom of the crater. Dawson hurriedly followed suit and continued his dive. Only when he reached the bottom did he realize, those dark red cracks he had just vaguely seen were not rifts where lava was erupting, but rather huge, constantly opening and closing insect mouthparts. Each time these massive mouthparts opened and closed, they gushed out a stream of extremely thick black liquid. This black liquid wasn't directly soluble in seawater. Once ejected, it quickly disintegrated into spheres, which were snatched up by the advancing humanoid spiders like treasures. The moment they touched their bodies, the spheres of black liquid immediately spread and covered their entire bodies, completely enveloping their slender, deformed forms, leaving only 2 red sacs on their ears that barely bulged or contracted. This was how the demonic lizardmen were born. Dawson suddenly realized, the target's most vivid memory was this very moment of their birth. The demonic lizardmen, successfully possessed by the black liquid, began to rise one after another. However, Dawson keenly noticed that a few humanoid spiders below them still did not choose to embrace the black spheres directly, but instead nimbly weaved through the black liquid, seemingly searching for something. The enormous, dark red mouth opened and closed again, spewing forth a torrent of thick black fluid. This time, however, it contained dozens of crimson crystal fragments, engulfed in the black fluid and broken into dozens of spheres that floated in the water. The lingering humanoid spiders immediately sprang into action, swiftly descending upon the crystal fragments and eagerly snatching up these unique black fluid spheres. Soon, they were finally enveloped in the black spheres studded with red crystals. Their flat, featureless faces suddenly cracked, revealing a massive, swollen eyeball, its enormous pupils flickering faintly with red light. This must be a red lizardman, similar to the spellcaster. Dawson nodded, noting that Harvey's analysis of the characteristics of the black lizardman and the red lizardman was remarkably accurate, practically identical to what he had witnessed himself. For a race as intelligent as egg-laying beasts to possess a sustainable civilization and extraordinary abilities is simply unheard of. Dawson couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Were these alien sea creatures truly the ones who came ashore and drove humanity from the continent's center? They clearly originated from the seabed, so there was no need for them to compete with the land-dwelling humans for survival? As Dawson pondered this line of thought, he felt more and more doubts and uncertainties. Suddenly, a vast shadow seemed to appear overhead. The invisible threat even caused the giant insects at the bottom of the crater to instantly close their mouthparts. Dawson instinctively looked upward. A massive deep-sea floating island, dozens of times larger than the sky domain, slowly passed overhead, its diameter approaching 10,000 meters. The shadow completely obscured the majestic crater, making it impossible for Dawson to determine its exact size. Countless demon lizardmen who had successfully obtained the black liquid's covering quickly rose to the surface, entering the floating island through the numerous cracks that appeared at its base. More demon lizardmen continued to pour toward it, like a massive ship arriving at the dock, awaiting passengers. It turns out this submarine crater is merely their birthplace, not the city where the demon lizardmen actually live. They actually live on a massive floating island capable of navigating the deep sea. Since it was just a fragment of a severed consciousness, Dawson immediately decided to follow the demon lizardman surge and fully penetrate this deep-sea floating island to investigate. But before he could get within 100 meters, a gaping hole, several times larger than the other cracks, suddenly opened on the side of the floating island facing the crater. A turbid, swollen eye, as huge as a silver moon and covered in interwoven red and black lines, instantly locked onto Dawson's invading consciousness. Without hesitation, Dawson immediately released a mind invasion and, like a streak of light, darted towards the surface. Chapter 537, Get on board first, buy the ticket later. Dawson tumbled awkwardly off the recliner. Shield, who had been standing nearby, quickly stepped forward to help him up. The chief's usually rosy complexion had turned pale, his forehead sheen of sweat. Give him a dose of moonlight brew. It looks like he suffered a shock to his consciousness. Be careful he doesn't develop the same kind of dissociation syndrome I did, Sareth instructed calmly. Dawson shook his head firmly. No, I'm allergic to that stuff. Just let me rest for a while. Gallagher tapped the mirror again and asked gravely, what strange thing did you find in your sea of consciousness? How did it escape so quickly? Did you separate its consciousness beforehand? Dawson half slumped in his chair, taking a deep breath before rolling his eyes and saying unhappily, how could I have known that a fragment of my consciousness, Connected to the sea of consciousness of the tribe, could still be found within the severed consciousness? I almost couldn't get back. He stood up and walked to the lab table, snatched up a piece of white paper, and with his manipulative hand, he began to rapidly sketch, quickly bringing to life everything he had seen during the mind invasion. Hush! Is this the birthplace of the demon lizardmen? Have they always been an intelligent species living beneath the deep sea? Could there be some connection to the sea people to the south? Faden scratched his head, his doubt surging. Seraph approached and examined it for a moment, then shook his head. There must be more than one such insect-like hive system. Their reproductive capacity is probably even more terrifying than that of the demonic orcs and demons. What's that floating island with giant eyeballs? It looks like the sunk in a layer, yet it can actually move on its own. Gallagher couldn't help but sigh. When he was still a high-level spellcaster, he had spent a lot of time traveling the southern waters of the continent, interacting extensively with the sea people, a close offshoot of the human race. The sea people were also capable of building a magnificent coral city over hundreds and thousands of years. This sea temple was also half submerged, half above the surface. Over time, this massive city, constructed entirely of magical coral, would grow and expand on its own, but it would never be able to navigate the deep seas like a giant ship. Dawson pondered for a moment and concluded, they absolutely have no blood connection to the sea people. Those coral people, like us, share the same written language and language. Even if they leave the ocean, they can thrive freely on land and learn divine arts and magic. Right, as the only high-ranking figure present, Fashield was stuck between the three legendary chiefs' discussion and could only cautiously suggest, Chief, shouldn't we immediately return the intelligence we've gathered to Mr. Kilthuzid? A momentary silence fell. Salas gave him a meaningful look, and he immediately lowered his head, not daring to say anything more. Dawson didn't think much of it, muttering somewhat discontentedly, Mr. Agent dug a big hole for me and nearly got me killed. Although he volunteered to provide the alien, I should at least give him some compensation for his labor. Right, Gallagher, who hadn't contributed anything the entire time, was just waiting for Dawson to say this. He immediately leaned in front of the mirror and exclaimed ecstatically, excellent. Following the principle of equivalent exchange, we cracked the information about the demon lizardman for Mr. Agent, and we deserve some reasonable compensation in exchange. He raised his hand and banged on the mirror, interrupting Serath's thoughts, and urged, the fighting in the Evil Moon Mountains has now come to an end. After the fall of the Demon Clan's frontline center, the main force has retreated 300 miles north of the hilly outpost. We only need to rebuild a permanent defense there, and we will completely control the entire northern part of the Evil Moon Mountains in the western region. The war with the demons, which had raged for nearly 30 years, had finally come to a temporary end. If the lizardmen of the Arctic Ocean were now sending their forces to invade the demon settlements in the northwest, they would likely need to, like the humans, temporarily put aside their feud and turn north to fight the more powerful and terrifying enemy. Gallagher continued, so, I hope to use Dawson's adventure to exchange for more and newer magical weapons and equipment from Mr. Agent. This time, we don't just want anti-magic weapons. If he truly sees the Federation as a close ally in the future fight against the lizardmen, then he should share some of the more advanced magical weaponry to equip our battle mages, who have been standing on the front lines of humanity's siege. Wow. What a ridiculous request. Shield shuddered, a single thought flashing through his mind. Wouldn't such a request anger the forum behind Mr. Kilthuzid? Mr. Administrator and Mr. Observer, wouldn't they think we were being too greedy? Sure enough, before Gallagher could finish, Dawson frowned and interrupted, this plan is not feasible. It's too offensive and reckless. A piece of alien intelligence will be exchanged for the magical weapons that others rely on to survive. If it were us, I'm afraid we wouldn't agree so easily. Salas suddenly chuckled and said dimly, then, let's get on board first and buy the ticket later. What do you mean? Doesn't he want to establish a united front against the aliens? The new Federation will include non-orthodox spellcasters, burrowed dwarves, and Eastman elves. It will be a huge extraordinary organization with the spellcaster forum at its core. Salas's illusory incarnation slowly walked to the window and whispered, join him and forget about the factional struggles within the Federation. Aren't we all members of the forum? Joining his new Federation as an individual, I believe our agent, oh no, we should call him His Majesty the Emperor of the North, will not refuse the voluntary joining of 3 legendary spellcasters, right, huh? Shield froze in his tracks, as if struck by lightning. After a long pause, he spoke dryly, Chief, You want to leave the Union and join Mr. Kilthuzad's new organization? How can this be possible? His mind was in a turmoil, unable to comprehend the chief's sudden, shocking statement. Salus rolled his eyes at him, then scoffed. Why? Am I, an old man, unworthy enough? Dawson rubbed his nose and suddenly joined in the chuckle. That's right. Anyway, the three of us in the Union have long since stopped intervening in practical matters. Those guys down there are so obsessed with their own personal gains, they're so crazy it really gives me a headache. Forget family interests, orthodox honor, or magical authority. I want to join the new Union. Under Mr. Agent's leadership, I'll be on the front lines against the alien invasion. Ha ha ha, he couldn't help but laugh as he spoke. Gallagher's expression changed several times, and suddenly he showed a strange smile and agreed. Good idea. Doesn't the new Federation adhere to the principle of mutual assistance regardless of faction? Well, I'll join too. Anyway, I need to help Mr. Agent right now to go to the far north of the western border to find out the main movements of the magic lizardmen. The elite battle mages under my command can also join the new Federation. We are all family now, and I want some reinforcements and supplies. It's not too much, right? Fadden stood there at a loss, watching the three powerful legendary chiefs rolling around like they had suddenly fallen ill, and for a moment he didn't know what to do. Chapter 538 3 Lines of Defense. What? 3 Union leaders want to join the new Union I founded as individuals. And they've even volunteered to come to the north and assist us on the front lines against the aliens. Harvey closed the crystal screen of his magical brain, a single thought flashing through his mind. Are these 3 old men schizophrenic? If he really let them all run to the north, what difference would it make to him? Could he really dare to dispatch them at will, to the ice sea base or the Isengard Rift to aid the Northern Army in their battles? As Dallin was choked, speechless. After a long pause, he slowly spoke. Perhaps the chiefs are reluctant to reveal the truth about the alien invasion too soon, thereby triggering internal unrest in the southern nations. So they intend to use this extreme method to force you to take the initiative and formally sign an alliance with the Federation. They want to shoulder the responsibility of jointly combating the aliens, but they also don't want the Federation to fall apart. Reiner's political acumen wasn't as sharp as Dallin's, but his long career in government had instilled in him the habit of deep reflection. He carefully analyzed. Your Majesty already intended to cooperate with the Federation, otherwise he wouldn't have given them such precious living lizardmen for free. With such a formidable enemy at hand, uniting all forces weaken is not a bad thing for us. Harvey rolled his eyes and said speechlessly, this kind of massive crisis, which could potentially affect the survival of our race, isn't something a single powerful transcendental individual can control or reverse. 3 legendary spellcasters sound impressive, but if I really put them on the front lines of the ice sea base, who can guarantee they can truly hold off that tsunami-like alien army advancing southward? He pointed to the information beamed from the magic network teleportation array, a diagram of the mind invasion hands drawn by Chief Dawson, and sighed. See? The demon lizardmen are like insects, easily creating tens of thousands of individuals ready for immediate combat. They even possess gigantic floating islands capable of submerging in the deep sea. Honestly, I have a feeling this thing isn't just a mobile floating island, it's more like a living creature, a giant creature with life and consciousness, a living, breathing creature capable of assisting the demon lizardmen in combat, or perhaps a living deep-sea war fortress. Pierce, who had remained silent until then, suddenly stood up and walked over to the map on the wall. He picked up Harvey's usual red pen and quickly drew 3 thick red lines along the Sacred Spine Mountains. Your Majesty, please look. The entire Divine Spine Mountain stretches for tens of thousands of miles from west to east, but the places that can truly be called gaps in the natural chasm are actually only the Evil Moon Mountain Canyon in the west, the area around Jackdaw Ridge in the middle, the nearby Isengard Rift, and the Golden Forest in the northeast corner. He paused, and his finger followed the red line in order, saying, north of the western border is the vast territory of the Demon Tribe. If the lizardmen want to go south, they must at least fight with the Demon Tribe first. I think even if they eventually wipe out the Demon Tribe and reach the Evil Moon Mountains, they will inevitably have consumed a lot of their living combat power. As long as the Federation leads the 7 wizarding nations to deploy all their combat forces here and hold their ground, they should be able to resist the other side's offensive to the south. The prerequisite, of course, is that the Federation needs to obtain magical weapon reinforcements from Spark City. Harvey nodded, stepped forward and took over Pierce's words and continued, yes, Their invasion from the west will have to go through the longest and most tortuous frontier, and the eastern Golden Forest is also located in a corner of the southern border. Moreover, the terrain around the Golden Forest is also an extremely rugged plateau. Although the elves are self-contained, they have hundreds of thousands of golden trees as a natural defense. They will not easily let the magic lizardmen cross the divine Spine Mountain and invade the southern border, as Dallin blinked and added with a malicious look. Besides, it is very convenient for them to be reinforced by the burrowing dwarves in the breadth of the hills on the southeast coast. The dwarves are also good at digging underground fortifications for defense. Coupled with the assistance of our new magic weapons, even if we fight a guerrilla war in the forest, I believe the magic lizardmen will not gain any advantage. Everyone couldn't help laughing, making Agno, who is half-elven, extremely embarrassed. Everyone knew that elves and dwarves had always been at odds. If the two tribes were to join hands to fight foreign enemies, the thought of them being both passionate and funny would be enough. After stopping laughing, Harvey pointed to his base camp and continued, so no matter what, the main attack from the central part of the southern border is actually the best choice for the demon lizardmen. The frozen sea seems out of reach, but it is actually the closest location to the central part of the sacred Spine Mountains in terms of landing operations. If their main force relies on that huge supergiant floating island and goes ashore along the ice sea base, they only need to pass through a sparse community of evil orcs to successfully reach the foot of the sacred Spine Mountains, and we are the most prominent nail in the entire natural defense line. What's more, there is an unguarded terrain gap like the ice-angered rift. Even if Spark City is strictly guarded, there is no guarantee that the other party will not find out the situation and send a surprise force to penetrate the Great Rift into Isengard. By then, Spark City and the Grizzly County behind it will be in a state of being attacked from both sides in the true sense. Harvey had never believed that the mortal nobles of the southern kingdoms were capable of facing such a powerful invasion. If the lizardmen's leaders were wise enough, they could even incite or enslave these defenseless humans, using them as cannon fodder to turn against their own bloodline kin. This had happened before, thousands of years into human history. When the demons crossed the Evil Moon Mountains and invaded the human realm, many of the Western lords, out of fear for their own lives and their families' wealth, surrendered to the demons, aiding them in the slaughter of their own people. Duncan, who spoke last, deliberated for a long time before abruptly saying, "Your Majesty, you seem to have forgotten the Church. Although they have completely withdrawn from the Evil Moon Mountains and recently suffered significant losses in central China, the holy city of Gower still retains a large number of inquisitors, and their battle priests are as powerful as the Union's Mage chapter. Should we also consider them for a alliance consideration?" "Yes, and the Church." After suffering a series of blows personally inflicted by Harvey, the Church seemed to have remained silent and retreated. The proactive dispatch of messengers to Harvey, requesting cooperation, suggests that the Church, since its founding, had known of the existence of the lizardmen from ancient traditions. They were also aware that the human race had been defeated in the interethnic struggles in the continent's center, driven into exile and struggling to survive in the southern territories. However, the Church's united resistance strategy went astray, and the sudden rise of the Union resulted in a complete failure to rally people, instead causing frequent civil unrest within the southern territories. However, it now appeared that the internal divisions and unrest within the Church were no less severe than those within the Union. Even the Pope himself had to lower his status and dispatch a priest of the mystic, hoping to leverage Harvey, a spellcaster who had previously been a foreigner, to dispatch troops to the holy city of Gowers to help him quell the spiraling situation. The Church is a hopeless bunch, and I don't have the time to help them resolve their internal strife. These charlatans are far too optimistic, even more so than the magical politicians in the Union. They have no idea how close the lizardmen's power has encroached upon us, and they're still dreaming they still have time to sort out their internal chaos. Harvey shook his head and instructed Duncan, "Simplify the intelligence sent by the Union and give it to the self-isolating priest Garrett in the city. He will have a way to contact His Holiness the Pope in the Holy City. What to do next depends on whether the 13th Pope truly upholds the Church's ancient promise of salvation." Duncan, having completed his mission, had just left when the door to the castle conference room slammed open. Vaughn, newly promoted to Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Northern Army, hurried in, followed by a long line of high-ranking intelligence officials. Vaughn walked over to Harvey's desk, knelt on one knee, and said hurriedly, "Your Majesty, the Isengard Expeditionary Force has just sent back an urgent report that they have arrived at the Great Rift in the Godspeen Mountains. Chapter 539 Arriving at the Great Rift. Is this the Great Rift of the Divine Ridge Mountains? Wayne lowered his telescope and turned to look at the pale-faced old Hughes. He and the old man were riding in the same war-beast vehicle. This was the first time the 50-year-old priest had boarded this bizarre alchemical creation. The rumbling noise at high speed and the violent jolts caused by the lack of a shock absorber were excruciating. Wayne, sir. Huh? Yes, up ahead is the Great Rift, Hughes replied with difficulty, swallowing the acid rising in his throat. Wayne frowned, picked up the telescope again and looked into the distance, muttering in confusion, "It looks more like a huge valley." A believer standing behind old Hughes came up cautiously and explained patiently, "The Great Rift itself is at the end of the valley. This is the only place in the northern desert with a water system. It is the Zelt River flowing down from the Divine Ridge Mountain. After entering the desert, it becomes a dark river rushing underground." He paused, looked at the old priest with some admiration. "Lord Hughes once traveled here alone when he was young. He can't be wrong." Daff ran up quickly, stretched out his long arms and climbed onto the chariot flexibly, and said in surprise, "We camped along the way, and the huge roar we heard from the ground, could it be the flow of the Zelt Dark River you mentioned? Through such a deep ground rock layer and thick quicksand, you can still hear the clear sound of flowing water, accompanied by the slight vibration of the dark river hitting the rock layer. How fast and wide must this dark river be?" Old Hughes coughed and waved his hand reservedly. "Ahem, that was more than 30 years ago when I was an adult. It wasn't a solo trip at all. If the Church Inquisition hadn't offered a bounty for my capture, I wouldn't have rushed into the desert in a panic, and ended up getting lost and accidentally stumbling upon the legendary Great Rift. In the end, he fainted in the wilderness from hunger and thirst. He was rescued by a tribe of rootless people who were grazing nearby. He recuperated for more than half a year before returning to the south." Wayne nodded in understanding. No wonder the old priest had found a way to contact the tribes in the border mountains and the northern desert for them. It turned out that he had established friendships with these rootless people living in this area decades ago. "What do you say? It's getting dark. Should we march directly into the valley tonight, or camp here to rest and react tomorrow morning?" Their war vehicles were limited for this expedition, and precious liquid mana couldn't be transported from Highland City's unstable makeshift teleportation array. They had to be frugal and economical with their use. This forced the soldiers to take turns using vehicles to replenish their energy during the intense march, leaving them on foot for the majority of the journey. The few remaining 10 mana scooters were assigned to the Special Operations Team, replacing the Ranger Sentinels in scouting and clearing the way. "Let's set up camp here. Let the mobile sentries enter the valley first to see what's going on inside." Wayne's command style mirrored that of Deputy Commander Vaughn. Although he was adventurous, he tended to be conservative and prudent in collective military operations. Dave rubbed his hands, nimbly leaped off the chariot, and said with a smile, "I'll take the mobile sentries into the valley, pick up a few engineers, and map the interior." This was one of the southern defense lines designated by His Majesty. A permanent military fortress was to be constructed, so the preliminary work must be thorough and meticulous to avoid delaying subsequent plans. Soon, the soldiers, receiving the order, halted their advance. Guided by several young followers of old Hughes, they crouched in the sand and quickly located the tributary of the hidden river. They quickly manipulated their engineer alchemy beasts to dig several manholes, and soon, water began to gush from the wells. 15 war beast vehicles formed a simple outer defense line, while those gathered in the center busied themselves setting up camp, lighting fires, and cooking. Only Dave, with great enthusiasm, led 7 or 8 bloodline warriors and 3 engineers, activated their magic vehicles and roared towards the valley entrance several miles away. As they approached the valley's entrance, the ground began to show a hint of green. A little further ahead, past the jagged rocks, they could see lush green shrubs in the distance. It seemed this valley, fed by the Zelt River, was a rare sweetwater oasis in the northern desert. Dave held the vehicle's handle firmly with one hand, his free hand impatiently scratching the back of his neck. He then gestured to his soldiers to slow down. "Brothers, once we enter the valley, split into 2 teams and explore from both sides. No need to push too deep. We'll meet up at the riverbank ahead in an hour. If you see anything unusual, report it to me immediately by radio." "Roger, understood." The soldiers immediately split into 2 convoys, each heading in its designated direction. Although the valley was lush with vegetation, it was mostly low, shallow-rooted shrubs. Trees were sparsely distributed, leaving a relatively wide field of view and no need to be overly cautious while driving. Dave, leading 3 soldiers, excitedly ran half a circuit around the valley's edge. They were the first to reach the broad banks of the Zelt River, awaiting the arrival of the other group. An orc soldier approached and lit his cigarette, grinning. It's even warmer in the valley than in the desert. Staying here tonight would be a lot easier than before. Dave took a deep drag from his cigarette and gestured toward the clear river before him. I bet Wayne's a bit of a stickler. What's wrong with camping here a few hours later? I haven't showered in nearly 2 weeks since leaving Highland City. Not only are my clothes rotten, but I'm also terribly itchy. The soldier scratched his head awkwardly, not daring to respond. Who was Captain Dave? He was the man who bravely rolled shirtless in the snow and mud during winter training in the north, and who discarded his military rations to lighten his load on cross-country marches, eating whatever he could find in the wilderness. How could he suddenly become so delicate and tidy? Of course, the reversible, custom-made uniforms the expeditionary force was wearing also contributed to his discomfort. The military factory had somehow hit upon a design quirk, applying an optical camouflage coating to the inside of the uniforms, forcing the soldiers to remove them for combat and wear them inside out. Normally, they would keep them hidden to prevent the coating from fraying. Many soldiers privately complained that the camouflage lining of their uniforms was causing skin irritation, some even breaking out in rashes. Let's wait until the other team rendezvous. We'll take turns washing in the river. Wayne doesn't have a set return time anyway, a little delay won't hurt. Just as Dave had made his decision and dropped his cigarette, another group of sentries thundered out of the woods, the 2 leading them each clutching a plump grouse. Boss. Game? Daff roared with laughter and immediately began to undress. 3 of you, stand guard. You 2 light a fire and roast the grouse. The rest of you, come with me in the water to cool off. In this uninhabited, untamed land, aside from a few rare magical creatures, there wasn't much to explore. Daff had volunteered to lead the group simply to relax and unwind. The long march, lasting more than 2 weeks, had been tedious and nearly sickening him. Only 3 engineers remained mindful of their duties. They nimbly climbed to the top of a large tree and, armed with a map, began mapping the terrain around the valley entrance from memory. As soon as they entered the water, Daff shivered with cold. SHH. How can this water be colder than the glacial rivers of the north in winter? Strangely, it's not frozen even at this low temperature. Before he could even scramble shivering ashore, the engineers from the treetops suddenly slid down and scrambled towards him. Boss. Boss. It's bad. There's a flash flood. Dave was stunned. What? Before he could finish, everyone suddenly felt the ground tremble faintly. A large number of small animals such as wild mice and mountain rabbits suddenly emerged from the bushes, huddled together and running away. Even birds in the towering treetops were startled and took flight. Get in the car. Retreat out of the valley. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 540, Artificial Mediterranean Sea. Over a dozen men on their motorcycles raced out of the valley without looking back, barely stopping after passing the high slope at the valley's entrance. Standing on tiptoe, Dave gazed down from the motorcycle. He saw that, at the riverbank below where they had stopped, the ground had, at some point, silently and with increasing intensity, opened up a deep fissure. The entire flat, grassy slopes of the valley below were a chaotic scene of cracked earth and fallen trees. This isn't some kind of flash flood, Dave cursed, grinning. This is an earthquake. Do you even know what an earthquake is? The soldier, patting his chest with lingering fear, muttered, what a scene. This is far more terrifying than a giant worm writhing underground. I almost couldn't stand. The relentless tremors seemed confined to the valley's interior. The teeming riverbed, boiling with this unnatural phenomenon, overflowed its banks and flowed freely, filling the valley with steam and fog, as if after a heavy rain. Suddenly, an untimely smell wafted through the air. Dave sniffed and said flatly, why does it smell like rust? Logically, after an earthquake, the earth stirred up, shouldn't there be a fishy smell? Dave really disliked this strange smell. It was a bit turbid and pungent to the orcs with their keen sense of smell. Before he could come to his senses, a more violent tremor occurred again. The previously cracked ground in the valley widened further. One of the bottomless cracks even extended all the way to the valley entrance, less than 100 meters from the high slope where they stopped to observe. "Boss, something's wrong. Shouldn't we retreat first?" Commander Wayne must have noticed something. Dave naturally had no reason to be brave in the face of a natural disaster. He nodded and was about to tell everyone to return. A sudden chill shot down his spine, making every hair on his body stand on end. His heart pounded uncontrollably. The bloodline warrior's innate abilities were unbidden, his nerves tense, his body instantly entering combat mode. A high-level bloodline warrior's ability to possess, like a spellcaster's monitoring spell, possessed the same malicious awareness. The soldiers behind him also received the same feedback, unsheathing their mono-rifles and loading them. They gathered in a circle, staring intently at the valley below. 100 meters away, from a massive chasm in the ground, two hideous monsters nimbly climbed out from the depths. Their seamless black skin, twisted and swollen limbs, and a single crimson crystal visor embedded in their heads. It was a demonic lizardman. As the two demonic lizardmen, carrying black water jars, climbed onto the surface, Daff opened fire without hesitation. The inscription on the new magic gun suddenly illuminated. An especially crafted dragon flame magic bullet flew out of the muzzle like lightning, heading straight for the visor of one of the demon lizardmen. For a marksman of Dav's caliber, 100 meters away was practically equivalent to a close-range shot. The bullet's precise impact pierced the crystal visor, sending the demon lizardman's head reeling as if struck by an invisible hammer, its neck bending backwards. The crystal visor shattered and exploded, leaving the demon lizardman dead before he could react. The remaining enemy, blasted through the chest by the remaining soldiers, suffered a series of bullets, his armor pierced like a sieve, and he collapsed to the ground. Damn it! Aren't these ghost things active near the ice sea? How could they have sneaked to the foot of the Divine Ridge Mountain so quickly? Dave didn't put away his gun, and continued to aim his sight at the patrolling back and forth near the huge rift. "Your Majesty, do you know that these monsters will invade from near the big rift?" The engineer took out the communicator from the backpack behind him tremblingly, and said loudly, "Sir, report to Battalion Commander Wayne immediately." Dave nodded, thought for a while and added, "Just report the situation, no need to request reinforcements, just say we will return immediately." A soldier on guard suddenly shouted, "There are still enemies. They are crawling up from the ground. Oh my god. There are so many, free fire, kill them if they show their heads, keep the vehicle activated. We are ready to evacuate at any time." Dave shot a demon lizard man who had just crawled out in the head, gritting his teeth. He now regretted not having brought some portable artillery. Even a single cannon would have been enough to collapse the chasm before him, burying the endless stream of reptilian alien monsters. The following lizardmen seemed to realize they were under attack and quickly locked onto the sentry squad, firing at them from the higher slopes. They began drawing black liquid from their tanks behind them, condensing it into crystal spears in their hands and hurling them. Fortunately, Dave and the others knew the spear's maximum range was less than 100 meters. Otherwise, with dozens of fierce spears concentrated on the exposed slopes, even if the metal hull of the trolley could have stopped them, casualties would have been inevitable. Seeing this, he decided not to fight anymore. He mounted his vehicle and waved his hand, ordering, "Let's retreat. First, we'll enter the desert, circle around, shake off our pursuers, and then return to the main camp." The soldiers responded in unison, mounting their chariots. They hadn't driven far when the valley behind them shook again, even more violently, this time, like a landslide. A soldier, about to accelerate, saw his vehicle's front end tilt, sending him and his vehicle careening outward. Dave pushed off with his feet, harnessing his own bloodline to bring the vehicle to a halt. He reached out and scooped the dazed soldier up, then lifted the vehicle back up and headed back toward the vast desert. Before descending the slope, he couldn't help but glance back toward the valley, nearly falling out of his car with fright. The emerald green valley, flat just moments ago, had collapsed into a vast crater during the last few minutes of trembling. A torrent of water surged from the bottom, engulfing the land and countless plants along with it. From the murky, dark waters, a seemingly immense, gigantic object slowly emerged. Though its precise form couldn't be discerned, the shadowy outline beneath the water suggested a living creature of unimaginable size, dwarfing anyone standing before it. As it slowly rose from the earth, it expanded the massive crater in the valley's center, until the entire valley floor had become a vast, artificial Mediterranean sea. An engineer, seated behind the soldier driving the magic scooter, frantically dialed with his alchemical communicator, unable to establish contact with headquarters. Seeing this, Dave roared, "Use code communication. This giant thing must be disrupting the magic network. We can't communicate this close to it, and it's easy for the enemy to locate us, boss." "What code?" "Enemy attack. Retreat. Take cover. Wayne will understand what I mean." Chapter 541. They are coming. The demon lizardmen actually arrived at the Great Rift before the Northern Army, and used some strange method to hide in the huge dark lake under the rift in advance, and only suddenly showed up after the expeditionary soldiers arrived. Harvey watched several of his subordinates pacing anxiously around the conference room and sighed helplessly. The intelligence the Federation sent was still a step too late. I should have expected they would be using some kind of deep-sea submersible vehicle for long-distance travel, but I didn't expect it to be so fast. Pierce stood by the huge map on the wall, muttering in a daze. But how did such a large, floating island sneak from the frozen sea into the ground and eventually reach the underground dark lake of the Great Rift? The vast underground water system, after millions of years of erosion, will form countless wide underwater passages. Some areas can even form a huge dark lake like the Great Rift. Duncan stood up and pointed to the map on the wall, explaining patiently, "The sea people living in the southern waters once reached the storm sea in the west by crossing the underground rivers on land. The burrowing dwarves of Hill's Breath also accidentally dug through the rock layer while building a new underground city, causing the entire city to sink into the dark lake." Reiner fretted, "But we don't know the distribution of the underground rivers. If we rely solely on rumors and hearsay, we can't determine the aliens' true movements underground. They might not even discover us until they reach our doorstep." Harvey waved his hand, reassuring him, "At least for now, we know for sure there's unlikely to be a massive underground lake within 100 miles of Starfire City, nor any underground river large enough for their massive, floating island to pass through." He was certain of this. After all, ever since he devoured the magic core, millions of energy-absorbing beetles in the underground veins throughout Starfire City had been able to link to him at all times, constantly monitoring all movements underground. Living tunnel-boring machines transformed from macrophage worms had been digging in the surrounding area for several years. Although they occasionally penetrated the Earth's crust, causing groundwater to seep out, no major underground river system had been discovered. "Your Majesty, what should we do now?" Pierce asked carefully. "There are more than 10,000 demon lizardmen appearing near the Great Rift, and they are gradually trying to infiltrate and explore outside the Rift Valley. Our expeditionary force's hiding place is less than 10 miles away from them. It may be dangerous to stay here any longer." Although Commanders Wayne and Duff expressed a very strong desire to fight, with a force of less than 2,000 people and a tight strategic supply situation, Harvey did not think they had any hope of defeating this alien submarine wonderkids. This was different from the positional warfare of the past where ambushes and firepower were used to crush the enemy. From the fragments that Chief Dawson saw in the alien's memory, it can be learned that the reproduction method of these monsters is more similar to that of insects. They are more like being manufactured than being born. This is enough to show that they don't care about the casualties and consumption caused by the battle, and will only invest any means to achieve their goals. For Spark City and the North, the soldiers are living people who have been carefully selected and trained over a long period of time. 2 brutal combat casualties will not only cause huge losses, but will also severely hit the morale and confidence of the people throughout the territory. Once fear and aversion to war spread, the defeat will inevitably be difficult to reverse. After thinking for a moment, Harvey said slowly, "The expeditionary force will immediately split into 2 groups. One mobile force will be stationed around the Great Rift to monitor the enemy's movements at all times. The other will rush to the border tribes in the northern desert as soon as possible to start mobilizing the migration. The followers of the Stanaherd Hermitage have already reached agreements with many tribes in advance. Our people will be at Wolffang Ridge on the border of Isengard and be responsible for receiving these rootless people." Reiner shuddered and asked quickly, "According to the intelligence sent back, there are more than 10 border tribes in the northern desert, and the number of people is probably not less than 20,000. If we mobilize them to migrate at one time, I'm worried that the situation in Fingigan City will not be stable enough." The sudden influx of so many foreign refugees even made the local city hall anxious. The people below who had received the rumors early on were talking about it. Although they did not dare to protest openly due to the power of the new emperor, the number of people who moved away from Fingigan City was increasing day by day. The central part of St. Valen, which had already suffered a large population loss, now seemed even more sparsely populated. The first group of people arriving won't be too large. There will always be those who don't trust us enough, or who fear betrayal, so they'll choose to wait and see. This will also give the local city hall some time to completely break up these rootless people from their original tribes, resettle them separately as families, and encourage them to intermarry with the local poor farmers. We'll also provide comprehensive basic education and legal education. Stabilize the situation quickly. Harvey raised his hand, knocking on the table. He said seriously, everyone, remember, population has always been the cornerstone of our development, but in the future, it will become a precious strategic resource, the vital force that will help us win this protracted war. We must not abandon them lightly, leaving them to the slaughter of alien monsters. After saying this, he turned to Asdalin and said, send a formal diplomatic letter to the capital of Isengard. Regardless of whether that Mad King is still a director or not, at least let the great nobles who control the situation under him know that the foreign enemies in the north have now chosen their country as the first stop to invade the southern border. Those who are willing to resist in advance can join us. If you choose to avoid the war and flee, at least you must find a way to evacuate and resettle the people in the territory as soon as possible. Asdalin chuckled and said lightly, Your Majesty, I'm afraid no noble will choose to take the people in the territory to flee. After all, their carriages can only be used to carry the fat and blood of the people they have plundered. Fortunately, the territory of Isengard is relatively vast, and it still has a certain strategic depth. Although the Great Rift of the Divine Spine Mountain has been occupied by the demon lizardmen in advance, they have relatively ample time to prepare for battle. Duncan took the initiative to ask, Your Majesty, the Federation, do we need to inform them immediately about Isengard? Of course, since the lizardmen have arrived at the Great Rift, they will soon take action in the surrounding areas. Although their first target of invasion is still unclear, as long as the war breaks out, the news will spread immediately, and we have no need to hide it. Harvey paused, and continued with a strange expression, didn't the three legendary chiefs say that they wanted to join the new federation we established? It's a perfect opportunity. I will write a letter personally and invite the three of them to come to Spark City to take charge. Arturo was shocked and said quickly, Your Majesty, they are legendary spellcasters. We don't know what the Federation is planning to do. If we just invite them here, will it be? What's more, the first chief is still trapped underground, and because of the flesh fusion ritual, he has to be bound to the energy-gathering array at all times. Lord Sereth is just trying to urge me to come up with a way to rescue him as soon as possible, Harvey said with a smile. There's still no complete solution, but moving him to a different place and allowing him to continue imprisonment would be an easy solution. Chapter 542 Highest Alert. The daily chimes of dusk in Spark City signaled the end of work for most municipal departments and manufacturing units. Police Chief and Minister of Justice Uriel, like the other officers in the police station building, would often leave his shift with near immediate precision. However, unlike his subordinates, who would rush home or out for dinner, after leaving the station, he would often go in the opposite direction of his home, patrolling several blocks of the inner city until the street lights came on and darkness fell. In theory, as the nation's top official, his heavy responsibilities exempted him from patrol duties, not even the arrests of foreign spies and murderers. However, he preferred the simplicity of his former life as a local police officer to the arduous bureaucratic duties of the police station and the rigid, formulaic bureaucrats of City Hall. A shiny, well-maintained revolver, a sturdy metal-forged mechanical arm. The mere sight of him patrolling alone at dusk was enough to strike fear into the hearts of the newly arrived refugees and thugs. In fact, the senior superintendent himself had never fired a single shot in his years of law enforcement, often subduing criminals with his bare hands, a model of civilized reasoning. After living in the north for several years, every night he walked the streets, he couldn't help but sigh. This desolate city, built by the hands of its hard-working people, was expanding at an astonishing rate. Back when it was still called the Frontier Territory, he could walk most of the way around the city walls in an hour each day, and then he and his right-hand man, Max, would quietly stand by the stadium to watch the football team's nightly practice. Now, with 80% of the inner city's land already under planning, buildings, factories, and various government departments are being built one after another. Even patrolling just one direction along the inner edge of the city wall would take him a full 3 hours. A full circuit of the inner city would likely take him an entire night without returning home. And that's just the inner city itself. It doesn't include the farms to the east, the outer industrial zone, the mining areas to the southeast and the satellite cities that are gradually forming, The garrison troops on the other side of the Glacier River, the forestry farms to the west, and the temporary settlements outside the city gates in the east, west, and north. These settlements will eventually be designated as formal residential areas. This has forced the National Police Agency to establish separate substations in each area, stationing a sufficient number of officers and alchemy beast guards to ensure rapid response and regional security management. Despite a recent population surge, Spark City boasts an exceptionally low crime rate compared to any other major city in the Southern Territories. The most common crimes are theft, assault, and discrimination based on one's social status. Serious crimes like murder and robbery are rarely seen in a month. Due to the cold climate, the population enjoys a widespread preference for ice-filled vodka, leading to frequent incidents caused by drunken behavior. However, with the National Medical Institute's successful development of a highly effective alcohol detoxifying drug, the uncivilized behavior caused by this habit has been quickly curbed. Because of this, Urio's daily patrols after get-off work often become more like a walk, watching fellow workers returning home together after a day's work, encountering locals who recognize him and saying hello, and helping a young man whose bicycle chain broke down along the way, always brings peace and joy to Urio, who always adheres to the chivalrous creed. Although he will never again ride a warhorse and bear sword in hand to fight for honor, being a respected law enforcer, striving for ideals and justice, is the true spirit of chivalry in the new era. Urio firmly believed he had found a worthy target of loyalty, His Majesty and the people. Shortly after the streetlights came on, the sound of someone pedaling furiously on a bicycle reached him from behind. Sir, the young officer slammed the brakes on his foot, stopping in front of Urio and panting with a laugh. You're volunteering to work overtime again. Which other blocks do you want to patrol? I'll give you a ride. It was Dale, a new officer recently assigned to the east ward of the outer city. He was a young man from Grizzly territory. Temporarily staying with his parents in the inner city, he had to pedal furiously for half an hour every day after get-off work to get home. It's almost 7 o'clock, and you're just getting back from the outer city. The daily commute is exhausting enough. Hurry home and eat. Urio waved his hand, indicating that his subordinate didn't need to accompany him during off-duty hours. Dahl paused for a moment, then forced a smile and explained, My parents both work on the farm. They just took a leave of absence yesterday and took the train back to Grizzly territory to visit relatives. Even if I go home, I won't have a hot meal for a few days. Urio rolled his eyes. It seemed the young man was offering his courtesy just to get a free meal from him later. Okay, come with me for another tour of the market area, and then we'll have a quick bite at the Honey and Bear restaurant. Great, Dahl cheered. My colleagues are right. The boss loves to treat people. Seeing Dahl's cheerful expression, Urio felt a sense of regret. He, too, was making excuses not to go home. Old man Corin, who had always lived with him, the man who had rescued him from the evil orcs and treated him like his own son, had been diligently arranging blind dates for him, mostly with teachers at the school where he worked. The young woman who kept showing up at dinner time was a real bummer to Urio. The two walked a little further, arriving at a street square when a low, humming sound suddenly erupted over the entire city. Woo 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 hum. Urio stopped immediately, his expression grim. It wasn't the usual bells used in street squares to announce the time, nor was it the shrill whistle that warned of a fire or similar incident. It was a magical alarm, blaring from the numerous alchemical speakers hung from the eaves of street lamps only when the city was invaded or in a major crisis. 3 long, 1 short, deep and resonant tones. This repetitive blast lasted nearly 10 minutes, enough to alert everyone that something was amiss. This was Spark City's highest defensive alert, previously sounded only once when remnants of the demonic army were spotted roaming the surrounding area. Many recent residents didn't even understand its significance. But Urio knew perfectly well, when the magical alarm sounded, the entire city was placed on martial law. All armed forces were immediately on alert, even soldiers and police officers on leave were required to return to their posts, and the entire city hall staff was on standby to respond to the Emperor's orders. Urio didn't need to be reminded. Dahl, who had just returned to the inner city, turned his bike around with a determined expression and pedaled at lightning speed towards the east gate. His combat post was in the outer city. Urio quickly found a police substation at the intersection. Entering, he saw the officers on duty methodically collecting their weapons. Seeing their commander in person, they quickly stood at attention and saluted. Sir, we didn't receive any advance notice from City Hall or the main police station. Could this be a drill? Uriel shook his head. He himself had no idea what the alarm was about. He borrowed the substation's alchemical communicator and prepared to call City Hall. But the siren suddenly stopped from the alchemical speaker overhead, and then a familiar, gentle voice boomed. Citizens of the North and St. Valen, I am your Emperor. I now personally announce a message concerning national security and the survival of mankind. We have discovered alien enemies in the northern wastes. An important warning. Chapter 543 Pre-War Propaganda. Evening was the most leisurely time of the day for the citizens of Spark City, many even having finished dinner and gone for a stroll. As the Emperor's voice emanated from the alchemical loudspeakers scattered throughout the city, even those who had been staying home emerged, gathering in groups to listen. Everyone was perplexed yet curious, yet, out of faith in the Emperor and his army, no one showed any sign of panic, even at such horrifying news. Patrolmen began to appear on the streets, solemnly blowing their whistles to maintain order. Most of these officers were locals, trusted and respected by the people, so naturally, no one would actively interfere with them. Although His Majesty had not declared a curfew, many people spontaneously returned to their homes after the announcement, preferring not to linger in the streets. So what if they were foreign enemies? We have towering, sturdy walls, undyingly loyal soldiers of common origin, and cannons that instantly blast targets to pieces. As long as Your Majesty and the Northern Army are there, Spark City will always possess an impenetrable defense. They have never been defeated in any battle. And so, the citizens gathered privately, and began to discuss. What exactly are those alien enemies in the northern wastes? How bizarre are they, and where are they? Meanwhile, Harvey's castle office was in an uproar. Your Majesty, the enemy is still thousands of miles away in the Great Rift of Isengard. We're activating maximum alert immediately, and you're personally broadcasting a message to the people. It's rather excessive. Reiner paused, trying to form his words, but the rest of the sentence remained unspoken. Are you trying to say we're like frightened birds? Harvey kindly added to his heartfelt words. As Dallin said gravely, before a full-scale battle breaks out, it's essential to inform the public of the truth. This also serves as a form of preemptive desensitization. This will prevent riots caused by fear when the lizardmen actually reach the vicinity of Spark City. Harvey nodded in agreement and reassured Reiner, I know this will cause a lot of trouble for City Hall. Consider it a preliminary stress drill. When war truly arrives, the pressure you face will be far greater than it is now. According to Harvey's plan, the Academy of Magical Sciences, the Alchemy Laboratory, the Medical Institute, and the Spellcasting Academy will be merged under the new Federation to become a national research institution, on par with City Hall and the military. Any plan or action affecting national security and future development must be unanimously approved by these three agencies before implementation, with Harvey holding both a single vote and a veto. The military was naturally happy to hear about war, and even if they had no target, they would find ways to create an imaginary enemy for themselves. But the City Hall hoped that the war would never break out, leaving them enough time to sort out internal affairs and develop the economy. Reiner had just received the production increase plan for the East Expansion Base, approved by Harvey during the day. No one expected that the news of the appearance of the demon lizardmen would come so quickly, leaving no one prepared. Pierce quickly handed a document to Harvey and said with great energy, Your Majesty, this is an application report regarding the early conversion of 3,000 reserve militiamen into regular troops, as well as the recall plan for 2,000 soldiers of the Garrison Corps. Deputy Chief Orange and Minister of Agriculture Kenny widened their eyes and said in unison, Are you crazy? The Garrison Corps is preparing for the upcoming spring plowing. Recall them all, and will you bear the responsibility if we fail to meet the grain production target next year? Reiner also spoke up to support his two subordinates. I have no objection to informing the public of the truth in advance and strengthening strategic defenses, but the problem is that the lizardmen are still thousands of miles away in Isengard. There is no need for us to be so cautious. Harvey waved his hand, interrupting their argument. The conversion of the reserve militiamen to regular troops is feasible, and the recall of the Garrison Corps will be postponed. Agricultural production and factory manufacturing must not be suspended at will. Food will always be the key to winning the protracted war. He turned to Minister of Construction Haru and said, Construction of the railway, originally scheduled to begin next spring, running directly from Spark City to the River Valley Outpost, will begin immediately. Regarding the expansion and reinforcement of the River Valley Outpost, you will discuss this privately with a military engineering team, The Academy of Magical Sciences fully cooperated with the alchemy laboratory. All experimental teams immediately halted all unrelated projects and devoted themselves to the development of combat alchemy beasts. The National Medical Institute similarly shifted its focus on potion research and development to battlefield medical treatment. As Harvey issued brief directives, each official present received their assigned responsibilities, and the war machine known as the nation began to silently churn. The heads of departments needing to collaborate and discuss matters left Harvey's office and returned to the lounge downstairs to continue their meeting. As the number of people entering and leaving the office dwindled, Harvey finally spotted his old friend, Ash, hunched over in a chair against the wall, bored. He was his Minister of Culture and Publicity. "Go home if you want to sleep." "Are you still going to sleep on the floor in my office?" Harvey couldn't help but tease. Ash's face flushed, and he muttered, "They just proposed to close the theater, stop the rugby game, and vacate the sports field for the training of newly recruited militia. Haha, my cultural propaganda department seems to have no effect on the victory of the war. That's because you don't understand the importance of the propaganda front." Harvey blinked. "I kept you until last because I planned to entrust you with an important task. I planned to merge the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Propaganda, and use them as the unified news release channel for the country and the official in the future." Ash was stunned for a moment and asked in confusion, "A channel for releasing news? Like today? Can't you just announce it to the people in person through the alchemical loudspeaker?" Harvey rolled his eyes. "Then I don't have to do anything in the future. I can just stand in front of the alchemical loudspeaker every day as an announcer. The throne of the Emperor will be left to you." Ash was so scared that he waved his hands to admit his mistake. "No, no, no. Isn't it just to release news for you? I'll do it right away. As early as tomorrow night. New billboards will be erected at all the street corners and squares in Spark City." "No need for billboards," Harvey said, picking up a scrap of paper covered with drafts from his desk. "I want you to have the information you need to convey to the public mass-produced through the printing factory into something called a newspaper. It won't be limited to official announcements from Spark City, but will also cover important events throughout the North and St. Valen." Back in the days of the frontier territory, erecting a massive billboard in the square in front of the town hall and sending officials and academy students atop wooden boxes to loudly broadcast information was essentially a coercive measure. Back then, the populace was largely illiterate, relying on the most primitive form of word of mouth to spread the word. However, with the territory's gradual development and the rapid spread of compulsory literacy programs, the local population's basic literacy rate has reached a commendable level. Therefore, proactively occupying the propaganda front and providing the public with reliable sources of information became a natural progression. Chapter 544 People's Weekly. "I will allocate a printing workshop to your propaganda department, which will be used exclusively for printing newspapers," Harvey said with a smile. "The newspaper will not only be distributed in Spark City, but also sent to the southern border. At least regional administrative centers like Grizzly Ford and Fingigan City must be within the coverage of the newspaper distribution." Ash knew it was time to ask for a big price, and quickly raised 3 fingers to bargain. "Grizzly Ford is okay, but Fingigan City and cities further south are too far away. If the news is urgent, it will be too late to wait for it to be delivered by ship. Unless you allocate 3 airships to me, specifically for transporting newspapers, no problem. The literacy rate of the people in the southern border is too low, and most of the people who can understand the content of the newspaper are nobles, wealthy businessmen or the urban middle class, so the circulation does not need to be too large. 3 airships are enough for you. As for the problem of newspaper printing, it is easy to solve. Spark City has a ready-made paper mill and printing workshop. Movable type printing and water wash paper making are both mature technologies available in this world. Basically, as long as Harvey gives an order, work can start immediately." The two discussed enthusiastically for a long time, and suddenly realized a problem at the same time. Apart from the printing and distribution of newspapers, the most important thing is the source of content. In addition to the news that needs to be released by the official, the key is how to collect and organize other important news. It was a rare occasion for Ash to take the initiative to take on such a big responsibility. "Isn't it just writing articles? Just leave it to me. You know my literary accomplishment and artistic appreciation ability very well. I will never let you down." Harvey hurriedly shook his head and said helplessly, "If it really comes to your idea, this newspaper might as well be renamed the Noble Journal. I want content that comprehensively covers political current affairs and is closely related to people's lives. I understand. You want everyone to be able to read the part of the newspaper that interests them, right? Ash finally understood Harvey's intention and couldn't help but sigh. Except for Spark City, there are indeed not so many ordinary people who can read and write in other places. How can I collect news that will interest them? After thinking for a moment, Harvey slowly said, "This is not difficult. You can go find Asdalon. The secret police and his intelligence department probably have a lot of folk information in their hands. As long as it is not confidential, you can use it to publish." Considering the newspaper's early days, it was necessary to observe public acceptance and feedback, so it was initially planned to be distributed only in Spark City, with each Saturday being the publication date. The front page would feature official news, with the remaining pages filled with local news and local anecdotes. The Ministry of Culture and Publicity was already affiliated with the City Hall, and with the official backing of the newspaper, it naturally became the most credible source of information, providing the public with fresh, first-hand information while also debunking rumors. Zyke emerged from the infirmary, fished a small, round mirror from his pocket, and nervously held it to his face beneath a tree. The magic ointment the doctors had applied to him was truly miraculous. Although the branding scar still left a faint red mark, it no longer looked like a deliberate branding of slavery, more like a scrape from a fall. With a few more applications, the scar should be completely gone. After a long sigh of relief, Schick carefully put the mirror back into his pocket. This exquisite little gadget cost him a full $3 gold. If he hadn't been so concerned about the healing of the scar on his face, he wouldn't have even bothered to buy it. The square in front of him was bustling with people. Someone seemed to be reading something aloud, which attracted Schick to hurry forward to see what was going on. Newspaper. Newspaper. The Spark Weekly, issued by the official authorities under the order of His Majesty himself. Local residents can get a free copy with their ID card, and additional copies cost $1 gold. The truth about the northern alien races. A detailed record of the small-scale battle that broke out between the IC Exploration Base and the Demon Lizardmen. The exploration reports of the Northern Expeditionary Force upon arriving at the Great Rift of Isengard. Official release. Absolutely true. Newspaper, newspaper, Schick repeated awkwardly. A helpful middle-aged man beside him explained with a smile, "This thing is used to publish the news from the old bulletin boards." "What? You want one too?" Awkwardly, Zyke touched the temporary residence ID card he had been carefully hiding in his arms and mumbled, "I haven't got my official residence ID yet." "Ha ha ha, no problem. I just got one, I can lend it to you first." The middle-aged man was quite enthusiastic. He carefully removed a large, folded sheet of paper from his bag, unfolded it, and handed it to Zyke. The moment he took it, Zyke felt dizzy. The 4 folded pages were neatly printed with dense text, even more terrifying than the literacy manuals he had learned in night school. Of the huge title at the top of the cover, Zyke could only make out a 3-word Spark City. Fortunately, the numerous texts were interspersed with numerous images. These were truly remarkable things. Even the uncle who lent him the newspaper didn't understand how the printing press managed to imprint such lifelike images onto the paper. Although in black and white, they looked incredibly lifelike. With just a cursory glance, one of the black and white images immediately captured Schick's attention. It depicted dozens of soldiers in crisp uniforms, wielding magical spears, fighting against the fell orcs. "Uncle, could you please read this to me?" Schick explained with a blushing face. "I haven't graduated from night school yet." The middle-aged uncle chuckled, took the newspaper with a bit of pride, cleared his throat and began to read. "His Majesty the Emperor has specially approved the second round of recruitment of reserve militia for the Northern Army. Anyone who is 16 years old or above, without obtaining local formal resident status, can go to the military recruitment office to enlist. The salary is monthly." Before the enthusiastic uncle finished reading the entire paragraph slowly, Schick couldn't wait to interrupt and ask, "Can you enlist without local resident status?" The uncle nodded with narrowed eyes. "Yes." "Did His Majesty personally use the communicator to warn the people of the whole city some time ago? There are foreign enemies in the north who are trying to invade our homeland. The expansion of the army is inevitable. At this time, restrictions are naturally relaxed to encourage everyone to join the army. It's a pity that I'm too old, otherwise I might have the opportunity to touch the legendary powerful magic gun." Before he could finish, Schick shoved the newspaper back into the man's hands, bowed in thanks, and hurried off to the military recruitment office. Tisk tisk. Another passionate young man. Chapter 545 Number 13 Hai Onkao. For a full week after the declaration of the High Alert Order, the entire Spark City hierarchy was insanely busy. Military officials were crisscrossing administrative departments almost daily, orchestrating the operations of this massive war machine. Late the weekend, Harvey, returning from the Academy of Magical Sciences to inspect the progress of the alchemical beast experiments, was dragged back to his office to continue his late-night work. New intelligence from the IC exploration base was laid bare for everyone to see. 160 miles northwest of the exploration base, at a natural sea swell mark number 13, traces of a massive deep-sea floating island of the Lizardmen, similar to the Great Rift of Isengard, had appeared. Judging by the exterior appearance of this massive floating island, capable of free submersion in the deep sea, it likely broke through the ice and emerged at the same time as Isengard's number 1 floating island, a week earlier. With a surveillance area so far from the exploration base, it was difficult for ordinary army mobile sentries to constantly monitor the swell's mouth. It was only with the help of the same airships used for long-range exploration around the base that they could observe the Lizardman fortress, which had broken through the ice and emerged after nightfall, using the strong reflection of moonlight on the ice. It was officially named Floating Island Number 2, so our prediction was not wrong. Harvey took a sip of tea, looked around at everyone and said, "The IC base and the Isengard Rift are both one of the main attack directions chosen by the Lizardmen to go south. 3 days ago, the Chief of the Federation, His Excellency Gallagher, also sent someone to send us the exploration results north of the Western Territory." As Dallin said calmly, their high-level combat mages advanced a full 2,000 miles to the north of the center of the demon front, and did not find any signs of Lizardman invasion. Instead, the defense outposts deployed by the demons along the way, and the large number of soldiers originally stationed there are gradually withdrawing. Pierce's expression condensed, and he said decisively, "If the retreat of the demon forces is not caused by the advancement of the Federation's front line, then it can only mean that there are also problems in their rear that need to be solved by mobilizing troops. This can also indirectly confirm that perhaps the demons have already had combat contact with the Lizardmen." The chief also said that further north is the limit of the airship's return trip. Unless we can send more mana fuel, the battle mages will have to rely on flight spells to cross the demon-infested wasteland. Harvey chuckled helplessly, thinking that this legendary chief, a former battle mage, never missed an opportunity to exploit him. "Let them stop here," Harvey said casually, waving a hand. "We have a large demon clan to defend the western line, so there's no need to worry too much about the situation right now." He then raised a hand and pointed at the map spread out on the long table. "We need to make a decision now. If we want to take the initiative instead of passively defend, should we choose the Great Rift of Isengard or the 13th Sea spout near the IC base?" The officials fell silent upon hearing this. Logically speaking, the IC base is nearly 7,000 miles from Spark City. Even the planetary-scaled energy-focusing array's long-distance teleportation requires a second transit through the snowy mountain settlements of the desert refugees. This clearly makes it the primary attack location with the greatest strategic depth advantage. While the thousands of small demonic orc settlements along the way offer little in the way of delaying the offensive, it's also unrealistic for the demon lizardmen to land at the mouth of the 13th Sea swell and traverse the vast wasteland directly to Spark City. The need for Blackwater weapons for resupply means they can't stray too far from the floating island fortress. However, a lingering question lingers in everyone's mind. What if a massive subterranean river beneath the 13th Sea swell flows directly through the desert land, then breaks through the rock formations again to surface at any underground lake close to Spark City? Harvey suddenly had a thought and was the first to speak. The floating island fortress at the 13th Sea swell probably doesn't have the ability to cross the underground river. From the intelligence sent back, it's clear that floating island number 2 is several times larger than floating island number 1 at the Isengard Rift. Reiner and the others reacted immediately, retrieving the image-retaining magic stones sent back by the scouts responsible for observation and alert at both locations and activating them in front of everyone. Indeed, such a crucial intelligence detail, and we didn't even notice it at first. Pierce slapped his forehead in sudden realization. Isengard's floating island number 1 was indeed enormous, but it was significantly smaller than the sky-blocking floating island Chief Dawson had seen in his Sea of Consciousness, or the miniature island-like floating island number 2 that had appeared at the 13th Sea swell. "Duncan, who had personally witnessed a demon battlefield in the Evil Moon Mountains, would even assert that floating island number 1 was not even as large as the demon's frontline central fortress. Chris said in surprise, then the truth has basically surfaced. Floating island number 2 at the mouth of the sea is actually the real alien main base, and number 1, which first appeared in the Rift of Isengard, is actually just an auxiliary vehicle used to shuttle through the underground river. The mystery lies above. How did they build such a huge submarine vehicle? This floating island number 1 alone is probably enough to accommodate nearly 10,000 combat units of the demon lizardmen, right? Harvey closed his eyes and thought for a moment, then said in a deep voice, I'm afraid it's more than that. If these alien monsters do not need to carry a large amount of food and supplies, and do not consider the internal activity space of the war vehicles, just to transport Blackwater supplies and combatants, at least 20,000 to 30,000 people can be crammed into this floating island. Everyone took a deep breath. Asterin quickly calculated the enemy's currently exposed troop strength within a split second and decisively declared, if your majesty's estimate is correct, they have at least 100,000 troops stored on the second main island near the Ice Sea base, and nearly 30,000 at the Isengard Rift. This far exceeds the entire population of Spark City, the great northern city, and this is only the first detectable combat units of the lizardmen. Thinking of this, Harvey couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Fortunately, the demons to the west were able to hold back the main force of the lizardmen from the south. Otherwise, with such a massive alien enemy simultaneously crossing the Divine Spine Mountains, the still fragmented human race would be powerless to stop them. The entire southern kingdom would surely be plunged into the quagmire of war, with countless casualties. Even though the southern human race is home to many exceptional spellcasters, their individual abilities are insignificant in the face of such a war that threatens the entire race. Reiner, how have the people in the city reacted to this incident recently? Harvey suddenly changed the subject, asking, has anyone shown fear or panic? Are there any untimely rumors or hearsay? Reiner was stunned. Wasn't this the responsibility of Azdalan's secret police? Why was he suddenly asked this question? Fortunately, the ever-cautious and responsible chief administrative officer, who is always aware of public opinion, quickly stood up and replied, since your public speech, City Hall has indeed received many inquiries from the public, but most of them were curious about the enemy's specific situation and basic questions like their current location. After the propaganda department's newspaper was officially published, most of the questions were made public through official channels. Even the dissected demon lizard captives were specimens, reshaped, and displayed on the first floor of City Hall. 90% of the people who watched them simply commented on their hideous appearance, but otherwise showed no signs of panic or fear. Minister of Construction Haru emerged from the crowd of officials and quietly reported to Harvey, Your Majesty, as long as you and the Northern Army are around, everyone isn't afraid. On the contrary, their fighting spirit is high. Many of the temporary workers the Ministry of Construction recently recruited have resigned and are planning to enlist in the reserve militia. Chapter 546 Infiltration Plan. After the Northern Expeditionary Force discovered a lurking advance party of lizardmen in the Rift of Isengard, Wayne and Duff knew their original plan to establish a permanent military base in the Rift was on the verge of collapse. Their independent force, numbering less than 2,000, was forced to withdraw. The order from the Spark City military had arrived 2 days earlier, with His Majesty personally ordering them to split into 2 groups. A mobile force of 300 men would remain stationed, tasked with monitoring enemy movements in the Rift. The larger force would withdraw immediately, following the Stanaherd Hermitage, which had acceded to the north, and be dispatched to the numerous border tribes of the northern Wildwood region, to assist these rootless people in migrating to St. Valen. Wayne and Dave had been sleepless for days. While this was their first encounter with the lizardmen, it proved that the Northern Army, armed with magical weapons, was not without the ability to confront these alien enemies head-on. However, the enemy's forces were simply too vast. Without reinforcements and heavy firepower, the 2,000 expeditionary forces were no match for the tens of thousands of lizardmen. If the lizardmen established themselves at the Great Rift, using it as an outpost and gradually encroaching on Isengard, they would have many more opportunities to clash with these alien monsters. Consequently, tensions had reached a fever pitch as the two fought to determine who would remain and lead the mobile force on security missions. Although we are of equal rank on the surface in this expeditionary military operation, the command is in my hands, Wayne said in a low voice with a gloomy face while wiping his gun. So after the military order is issued, I am fully qualified to send you to lead a large force to be responsible for the migration of the border tribes. If you continue to entangle with any and delay His Majesty's plan. Humph, when the military investigates, Vaughn won't be able to save you. Dave gritted his teeth and said indignantly, since you know that we are of equal rank, you shouldn't use the command authority to pressure me everywhere. Wayne, I treat you as a brother. You feel that you can't afford to lose face by running away as soon as you come into contact with the demon lizard people. Do you think I can afford to lose face? As the first officer with command power, you shouldn't stay here and put yourself in danger. Wayne was stunned for a moment, then said sinisterly, don't think I don't know why you volunteered to stay. Humph, His Majesty and the military are currently struggling with a lack of intelligence. You think you can ascertain the exact situation on Floating Island, one with just a few hundred mobile sentries stationed there? Absolutely wishful thinking. Daff was indeed widely regarded as the #1 reckless man among the veterans of the Northern Army, but that didn't mean he was completely clueless in battle. Most of the time, he was simply more adventurous than other commanders. Within the limits permitted by His Majesty's orders, he leaped around and exploited more opportunities to gain advantages. From a purely personal perspective, Wayne, also a risk-taker and adept at making small gains, preferred Daff's style of command. Compared to Vaughn's measured approach, his rigid covering fire approach, Daff's flexible, interweaving tactics felt more like a dance of swords in a boiling passion. He took a deep breath, and forcibly suppressed this impulse that seriously violated the nature of a soldier, and whispered, you want to find a way to sneak into Floating Island #1, right? Duff, whose idea was suddenly exposed, blushed, and said hesitantly, His Majesty asked us to stay where we are and monitor the enemy's movements, but did not order what to do specifically. Since it is a monitoring and early warning, we naturally have the responsibility to find out the enemy's internal situation. If we don't find a way to sneak into the turtle shell half sunken in the water, the military will always have only a vague understanding of their situation. When a real fight breaks out, we will be caught off guard by their weird and strange methods. Seeing that what the reckless man said was indeed reasonable, Wayne fell into a brief silence for a while. What were you planning to do? You bastard, you asked your mobile sentries to patrol the entrance of the valley these days. You did these sneaky little tricks. Did you think I was completely unaware of it? Dave rubbed his forehead and smiled innocently. Don't worry, I didn't alert the enemy. I just asked my brothers to attack a vanguard team of lizardmen who were also out exploring. After wiping out the targets, we hid their bodies nearby. Wayne was stunned and asked, hide the bodies? What are you going to do with those disgusting things? Back in Spark City, His Majesty asked Tommy to take the guards to capture the aliens alive at the Ice Sea base, but let the senior officers observe the entire dissection experiment. Once the outer shells of these twisted and deformed monsters were broken and the internal flesh and blood were exposed, the whole body would immediately melt and disintegrate until it turned into a pool of rotten and smelly black pus, leaving only a complete outer skin. Of course, it's for their tough skins, Dave explained enthusiastically. Besides, there are the Blackwater weapon canisters they carry on their backs. With these two things, I only need to select some tall and slender soldiers, put on their skins, and sneak in under cover of darkness. The chances of success are very high, Wayne suddenly realized. That's right. The demon lizardmen have a natural ability to sense spellcasters. The reason why they accurately tracked the exploration team led by Mr. Duncan and finally launched a surprise attack when the airship landed to rest was not because the entire team was composed of spellcasters. The reaction of surging magic power to these monsters was as dazzling as a candle in the night. Even when using the ice fishing plan to lure prisoners, they had to use the magic power core on the floating airship to fake strong magic fluctuations to track targets hidden under the ice. However, ordinary soldiers and bloodline warriors could not be sensed or tracked by them. Although Dave and his companions engaged in a small-scale battle upon arriving at the Great Rift Valley, the demon lizardman teams dispatched from Floating Island #1 to this day had not directly discovered the expeditionary force's hidden base nearby, which was sufficient to prove that they were unable to locate their position. I agree with your infiltration plan, Wayne deliberated again and again, finally saying reluctantly, but I have a request, don't dither. As long as you support my operation, everything else is easy. Report this impromptu infiltration plan to the military and His Majesty, Wayne said slowly. I don't need to argue with you about who will lead the team, but we must obtain the permission of His Majesty and the military. We must make all the necessary preparations before we launch the operation. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 547, Mines and Bombing. Wayne and Dave, these two bastards, Pierce paced back and forth in the office in rage, muttering to himself, "Your Majesty, please immediately issue an order through the military to deprive them of their command in the Ice-Angered Expeditionary Force." Vaughn stood aside at a loss, looking at the furious commander and not daring to speak. But His Majesty did not seem angry. Instead, he stared at the action request document sent back by Ice-Angered in a daze. No need to be so angry. They were just asking, and they didn't actually act on their own against orders. Harvey pointed to the documents in front of him and said with a strange expression, "To be honest, at the beginning I also thought about sneaking in to obtain internal intelligence about the demon lizardman's floating island fortress." He paused, tilted his head to look at Chris and Benoit who were summoned to the meeting, and said meaningfully, "But right now, I have thought of a more suitable method, which can not only effectively obtain intelligence, but also tentatively verify the defensive strength of the floating island fortress." Chris and Benoit looked at each other and said in unison, "This. Your Majesty, are you planning to use high explosive bombs that are still in the research and development stage into the battle?" Harvey nodded and chuckled, "That's right. Since Wayne and the others call floating island number 1 a turtle shell, then let's try to use high explosive bombs to bomb it from the air and open a hole in it, and see what's going on inside." It is indeed impossible to completely destroy a huge military target like the central fortress with just one round of bombing, but if the actions of the air combat units can also lure the enemy and divert the attention of the ground infiltration forces at the same time, then in a sense it is a good tactic that kills two birds with one stone. Duncan took the initiative to stand up and said, "If Your Majesty intends to use the airship again, then give the task to me. The Eye of Illusion, Astrologer and I will pilot the airship, and we are very familiar with it." "Well, it's feasible," Harvey nodded, "but the high explosive bombs are too heavy, and one airship is not enough. In addition to the reconnaissance type sent to the Ice Sea base, I want to put all the 10 transport types rushed out by the military factory into action this time." These words immediately cheered up Chris, and he said happily, "An airship can carry at least 5 bombs, Your Majesty. If 50 bombs are deployed at once, even a small hill can be razed to the ground in an instant. As for that floating island fortress, it is not impossible to cut half of it directly from the top. Let this infiltration operation requested by the Expeditionary Force be their first shot of defensive counterattack against the demon lizardman." After nearly 2 days of anxious waiting, Wayne and Duff's Expeditionary Force, hidden in their base, received the joint approval from Harvey and the Northern Army. The infiltration plan was unexpectedly unanimous, but it required the addition of a makeshift airship bombing squadron. Their aerial bombardment would provide a distraction for the ground-based infiltration team. The Expeditionary Force spent half a day constructing their only complete teleportation array. A steady stream of airship modules and ammunition arrived near the Ice-Angered Rift, accompanied by a group of mid- and high-level spellcasters. Led by Duncan. The bombing squadron was a familiar face, 3 high-level mages who had always worked well with the Northern Army, along with necromancers from the Academy of Magic, such as Michelle. All the ammunition and supplies are in place. At dawn tomorrow, we can officially launch the operation. Duncan looked at the special team members who were trying to wear the equipment of the demon lizardman, and said seriously, "I must remind you again that this kind of skin and shell can only play the most basic confusing role. Under the premise that it is not clear what kind of communication methods are used by the enemy internally, once you encounter those monsters head-on, the risk of exposure will be very high." Dave smiled foolishly and continued, "I understand. Mr. Duncan, the most covert way to infiltrate is to eliminate all the enemies who discover our traces along the way. The infiltration plan formulated and improved by His Majesty himself is not complicated. There are a total of 20 spellcasters in the aerial bombing team. 2 people in a group will board 10 airships to arrive above floating island number 1, deliberately lure the enemy to discover, and then drop heavy bombs to detonate, directly attracting all the attention of the demon lizardman. The infiltration team, led by Dave, consisted of 10 bloodline warriors. Following previously acquired intelligence, they entered the water from the edge of the valley's sunken sea, submerged beneath a floating island, and quietly entered the area. They then gathered internal intelligence and attempted to plant a small number of timed detonation dragon flame bombs in a concealed area, preparing for a breach in the area for their subsequent evacuation. Time quickly passed midnight, and the newly assembled airships were fully inflated and launched. The bombing squad's spellcasters boarded one by one, each loaded with 5 bombs at their maximum capacity, and slowly ascended toward the valley in the direction of the Great Rift. After painstakingly donning the skin armor stripped from the corpses, Dave and the others, each donning a cape coated with optical camouflage, climbed aboard their trolleys, and, under the cover of Wayne's support force, sped swiftly toward the Great Rift. To fuel the massive fleet of airships, the expeditionary force had nearly exhausted their reserves of liquid mana. A failure to achieve complete success would mean sacrificing most of the resources needed to build a permanent base in exchange for a meaningless exploratory attack. Such a loss was unacceptable to the expeditionary force. Therefore, beneath the surface of seemingly reckless risk-taking, everyone involved was extremely cautious. About an hour later, the air and ground forces successfully reached the valley's mouth. Under the fading moonlight, the airship squadron easily located their bombing target, the floating island fortress that rose sharply from the massive sinkhole in the valley's center. It was a striking sight. Though pitch black and silent, it stood in the center of the lake. Despite the devastating destruction of the valley floor's vegetation, the faint red glow reflected from the ground still provided a clear indicator of their direction. A vast horde of demonic lizardmen emerged from the floating island, their crimson crystal visors gleaming in the moonlight. Even in the deepest darkness before dawn, they emerged from the island, busily carrying out expansion efforts. Cutting down trees that still stubbornly grew, driving and slaughtering the panicked beasts, but not for meat. Astrologer and Eye of Illusion, piloting a shared airship, gazed down from the sky. She loathed these strange, alien races from the far north. These insect-like monsters seemed incompatible with everything they found themselves in. Once established, they began to destroy all natural existence around them without any reason. I wish we had enough airships and bombs to completely bury them in the valley's chasm. Busily maneuvering the airship, Eye of Illusion couldn't help but chuckle at this quiet complaint. I'm afraid everyone in the airships aloft right now has the same thought. As he spoke, Duncan's airship ahead signaled the start of the operation. Eye of Illusion took a deep breath and, with a slightly clumsy touch, twisted the mechanical lever. 5 bombs slid down simple rails into the drop port below the pod. Ready, countdown. 3, 2, 1. Drop. When the alchemy communicator gave the next command, Astrologer and he pulled the lever again. The heavy high-explosive bombs instantly released from the released grappling hooks and silently and swiftly slammed into the massive floating island directly below. Chapter 548 Death from the Sky. Everyone, attention. We'll reach the target area in 10 minutes. Dave struggled to stuff the palm-sized alchemical communicator back into his arms. The skin, ripped from a corpse, was a woefully ill-fitting piece of armor. The twisted and swollen joints threatened to burst under the bulging muscles of the bloodline warriors, making even the most basic mobility impossible. Many were forced to sever their joints and tightly wrap the exposed skin with strips of optical camouflage-coated cloth. Above, the fleet of airships, sheltered by clouds, began to slowly descend. Under the moonlight, many of the demon lizardmen on the ground spotted the strange craft overhead, pausing their work and looking up. The airships finally hovered 100 meters above the floating island. Soon, Dave could only faintly hear a series of strange whistling sounds, like someone whistling vigorously. It was the friction of the heavy metal of the high-explosive bombs against the air. Many demon lizardmen were immediately captivated, some even climbing onto the surface of the floating island, staring up at the scene that baffled them. In full view of the crowd, dozens of metal cones dropped from strange aircraft in the sky, like silent death, crashing headfirst into the top of the floating island. Boom! Boom! A massive ball of crimson flames suddenly erupted, and the top of the floating island fortress resembled a small erupting volcano. Blazing fireworks, mixed with countless flying fragments, shot skyward. The demon lizardmen standing by the impact point were instantly annihilated. The powerful air currents triggered by the explosion rose and expanded, forming a fierce cyclone that spread outward. Countless demon lizardmen standing atop the floating island were almost instantly struck by invisible steel hammers, being thrown back, limbs shattered and bones torn apart. A torrent of blood and flesh rained down on the calm water, soon dyeing it completely red. The shockwave from the explosion dissipated extremely quickly. Although it only affected an area less than 200 meters above the top of the floating island, The fragments shattered from it rained like raindrops, indiscriminately hitting the stunned enemies standing on the ground nearby. The stunned lizardmen became prime targets. Without the shelter of trees, they were mercilessly pelted by debris in the devastated clearing. This was only the first wave of bombing. According to the original plan, 50 high-explosive bombs were to be dropped by the bombing squadron in 5 waves, repeatedly bombing the top of the floating island at low altitude. Before the enemy could fully react, the airships in the sky shifted their formation again. Several airships assigned to the second round of bombing regrouped and settled directly above the floating island. More than 10 bombs silently descended, once again hitting the same spot. The lizardmen who had survived the first wave finally reacted and began to flee the area around the floating island on their twisted legs, realizing that by staying away from the floating island, they would be safe from the falling debris from the explosion. The crimson waters surrounding the floating island began to boil, and a large number of the lizardmen within the floating island began to leave the island through the underwater exits, scrambling ashore like ants and running away. It looks like the bomb penetrated the top of the floating island, causing some damage inside. Dave and his companions quietly approached the area amidst the chaos, taking cover in the darkness beside a cluster of tall, fallen trees. He inserted the magic gun's magazine back into the ammunition bay, a sharp metal-on-metal clinking sound. He looked up at the sky again, where a bright white light flickered repeatedly from the pod of an airship, the signal for the infiltration operation to begin, and the third round of bombing would be temporarily postponed, giving them about 10 minutes to complete intelligence gathering within the floating island. More and more demon lizardmen emerged from the water, and the smoke and flames from the top of the floating island nearly obscured the sky. The high explosive bombs, mixed with dragon flame powder, had a natural incendiary effect, igniting a sea of steaming flames even though the floating island's surface was devoid of any flammable materials. "Prepare to enter the water," Dave called out, and with his special forces, he stooped through the logging ruins, silently reaching the water's edge. A lizardman, whose lower body was damaged by the explosion, both legs blown off, survived the fall. With its visor nearly shattered, it struggled to its feet. Though silent, it seemed to be turning its head to warn the fleeing force in the distance. Crack! The next second, its head suddenly twisted 180 degrees. Dave's swift and ruthless attack had thwarted the team's exposure before it was even a whirlwind. "Boss, why don't you wait and see how this thing communicates with its own kind? Are you a pig? If we're exposed before we even enter, what if there are still enemies on the floating island? Would that be a perfect trap for us?" The Special Forces team slid silently into the water, immersing themselves in the icy cold waters of the dark river and lake, swimming towards the deep fissures of the floating island below. From the previous bombardment, they had observed that there were clearly hundreds of underwater entrances and exits to the floating island, distributed in different directions. The fissure entrance they had chosen happened to be one where the enemy was less likely to emerge. After quickly approaching the fissure, the team pressed against its sides and waited for another half-minute. Sure enough, they encountered several demon lizardmen who had fled in panic. They were easily pierced by the alchemical spikes in their hands, and before they could react, they were slowly sank deeper into the water. His Majesty had personally explained these monsters' weaknesses. If a demonic lizardman's outer shell was breached and its internal flesh and blood were exposed, it would be doomed. So what if they're naturally resistant to magic? "I'll show you the power of mortal physical attacks," Daff smirked to himself. He raised his hand, signaling the others, and then dived into the crevice's entrance. As if passing through an invisible, transparent membrane, Daff felt himself instantly out of the water and into a corridor. The ceiling of the corridor was inlaid with irregular crystals resembling magic stone. They were the same deep crimson as the demonic lizardman's crystal visors, but they slowly flickered a faint, dark red light, barely illuminating the surroundings with each breath. The air was filled with the unpleasant stench of rust, and the ground beneath my feet felt sticky, as if an enemy had, in panic, overturned a canister of black water, spilling the water onto the corridor floor. Fortunately, the bombardment overhead didn't reach the floating island's underwater area, otherwise the flammable black water would have completely ignited it, transforming it into an impenetrable sea of fire. A soldier whispered through his crystal visor, "Captain, feel the wall. It's surprisingly soft." Dave raised his hand and felt the uneven interior of the floating island, which felt surprisingly wet and sticky, as if he had entered the belly of some prehistoric beast. This thing, having been navigating deep-sea rivers for years, couldn't be the steel or rock it had been expected to be. It was just that the material was so strange that the team members couldn't tell. Carefully pulling out the spikes, prying off a piece of the sticky interior and placing it in his tactical waste pack, Dave whispered, "This channel at the entrance and exit must connect to other areas within. We must proceed cautiously and record everything along the way with the image stone." "Yes," the soldiers nodded in response. As they took a step forward, the sound of slippery footsteps echoed around the curved corner of the corridor. 5 or 6 demon lizardmen, each carrying a blackwater weapon canister, were surrounding a taller, more twisted, lanky fellow in the center, hurrying toward the rift's exit. Dave's gaze narrowed as he realized the monster in the center didn't have the black canister on its back like the others. It was a red lizardman. Chapter 549 Key Intelligence. Both sides were visibly stunned by the sudden encounter, but Daft's infiltration team reacted first. Despite the commander's lack of command, they instantly drew their alchemical daggers and spikes, demonstrating their extensive combat experience. Daft took a deep breath, pushed his legs against the hard tunnel floor, and rushed towards the enemy, holding the spikes first. 5 or 6 black lizardmen scattered instantly. The red lizardman in the center suddenly raised their hands and pointed. A flash of red light burst from its palm, shooting straight at Daft. In a flash, Daft twisted his waist and rolled onto his back, sideways, passing through the red light. In an instant, he was close to one of the black lizardmen standing at the outermost edge. The sharp spikes silently penetrated the opponent's neck. As the spikes were withdrawn, dark red blood mixed with thick black water rushed out from the finger-sized puncture hole. The enemy barely reacted, clutching the hissing blood gushing from his neck as he twitched and collapsed to the ground. Almost without a pause, the bloodline warrior's powerful body twisted and slammed into another enemy's arms, only to be met with a crystal shield, hastily erected from the black water. A flash of cold light flashed from Dev's palm, and the sharp spike struck the black shield, sparking a brilliant spark, but failing to penetrate the enemy's carapace as intended. Lieutenant Callum attacked almost simultaneously. His alchemical dagger spun a halo of light, deftly slicing across the throat of a black lizardman from the other side. Dark red, sticky blood trickled down the knotted flesh of his forearm. Tiny black spikes, ejected from the enemy's wrist, slammed into the camouflaged face, shattering the dark red crystal visor like a spider web. The extremely narrow corridor instantly became the stage for a bloody battle between the two leaders. Red lightning blasted against the soft inner wall of the corridor, blasting a deep crater the size of a skull. Slippery, sticky tissue fluid splattered out, causing the inner wall to wriggle violently. The breach contracted wildly, trembling as if alive. "Is this thing alive?" the soldier holding the image recording magic stone exclaimed in shock, immediately redirecting the magic stone's light mist and meticulously recording it. One soldier, whose violent bloodline had awakened, saw his muscles surge, tearing through the tough leather camouflage. Holding 2 short swords, he roared and charged into the enemy group, knocking 2 black lizardmen with raised crystal shields back with a thud. He was also directly met by a second burst of red lightning from the red lizardman. With a crackling sound, a puff of green smoke rose from the berserker's towering form. Plasma turbulence, unleashed by the lightning explosion, coursed through his body. A brief moment of electric paralysis immediately halted his furious charge, forcing him to fall to the ground, tangled with an enemy who had condensed a long black water blade. The berserker's crystal visor, already loosely attached to his face, instantly dislodged from his body. The entangled black lizardman seemed stunned for a moment before finally glimpsing the twisted, beastly face beneath the visor, its sharp, protruding fangs, and its scarlet, ferocious eyes. The paralysis prevented the berserker from struggling to his feet. The exposed disguise only fueled his ferocity. Facing his fallen foe, he let out a savage laugh and delivered a powerful headbutt to his opponent's face. With a crisp snap, the black lizardman's visor shattered, and more red light burst forth from the rift, shocking the soldier so hard that he kicked his legs and fell motionless. "Damn it! I shouldn't have brought this idiot into the operation," Daft cursed inwardly, his heart in disarray. While the berserker bloodline does grant immunity to many non-lethal injuries in combat, possessing an extremely high tolerance for wounds and pain, its downside is equally fatal. It's too reckless and impulsive, becoming as bloodthirsty and frenzied as a beast, unable to control itself. Fortunately, in a split second, the sudden encounter swiftly destroyed over half the enemy. The 3 remaining black lizardmen, surrounding the red lizard leader, retreated repeatedly, seemingly considering fleeing. The leader, having unleashed 2 red light attacks in a short period of time, now seemed somewhat sluggish, demonstrating that each attack consumed a certain amount of energy, and that they couldn't unleash this terrifying, alien magic indefinitely. "Intercept them," Daff commanded decisively, and the remaining bloodline warriors, already eager to engage, immediately understood. One soldier, possessing the gift of immense strength, even lifted up the corpse of an enemy from the ground and swung it towards him. Amidst a huddled battle, Daff suddenly groaned. Turning his head, he discovered that the camouflage covering his shoulder had been torn by his muscles, revealing a crystal spike piercing the exposed area from nowhere. However, the flesh at the wound was healing at a visible pace, slowly expelling the crystal. The soldier nicknamed Spider leaped lightly, using his agility to step on the soft side of the tunnel, vaulting across the crowded front battlefield and landing steadily behind the enemy, directly blocking their retreat. The emaciated red lizardman suddenly fell backwards. A tiny red current emanating from his crystal visor crackled and struck the flickering glowing crystal above his head, instantly transforming it into earth-like, shimmering form, transforming into a dim streak of light that streaked towards the far end of the tunnel. They might be alerting their comrades for help. Daff instantly deduced their purpose and, with a low cry, pounced once more upon the remaining enemies. They must resolve this immediate problem quickly, then leave this tunnel and move to another area to avoid any reinforcements. The black lizardman simultaneously conjured blackwater whips and crystal shields, struggling to defend while struggling. The soldier gifted with immense strength ignored the sharp spikes on the whips, yanking the scabbards with a powerful tug, pulling the black lizardman staggering out of the shrinking defensive circle. Blood-soaked, rough fingers pressed down on the top of the man's head, cracking bones instantly. Taking advantage of the gap in the enemy's defense, Dave and Callum dodged, one on each side. Their sharp spikes flashed coldly, piercing the temples of the last 2 black lizardmen. Then, narrowly avoiding a red blast from the red lizardman that nearly struck him in the face, they narrowly avoided a red blast from the red lizardman. After barely managing a final blow, the bulging sacks beside the red lizardman shrank, and the red lizardman slid down to the ground, their back against the inner wall of the tunnel. With a slight tilt of their head, they died. Dave snorted coldly, turned the spikes around, and was about to smash into the opponent's crown. But in an instant, he found that the tunnel wall the enemy was leaning against suddenly trembled and squirmed, and then suddenly opened a crack, quickly swallowing the red lizard man's body in one gulp. The team looked around in shock and found that the bodies of the black lizard men who had just died in the fierce battle were also slowly melting into the originally hard tunnel floor in the smelly black liquid, flowing all over the ground. Dave frowned, and heard the sound of footsteps approaching quickly from the distance on the left side of the tunnel. He said to the soldiers in a hoarse voice, "Something is wrong. This floating island fortress seems to be a huge strange living creature. Let's advance to the other side." Chapter 550 Regeneration Chamber. "Is Wolfhead dead?" Dave asked softly, frowning as he walked over to the fallen berserker. Even though there was a red lizardman among the enemy who could use red light attacks, the loss of the man so soon after the operation still left him heartbroken. They were all close comrades, their blood connection from awakening their talents making them like brothers. The loss of any one of them would bring everyone down. "Just gave him a shot of resuscitation potion, boss." Before he could finish his words, Wolf had bolted upright. The charred skin on his front peeled away, revealing the crimson muscles that were rapidly growing. His face, already monstrous from his frenzy, now became even more hideous and distorted. "Hiss. Boss. This corpse skin we've covered seems to offer some immunity to that terrifying red lightning." Wolf had touched his frantically healing wound and groaned in pain. Daff felt relieved, nodded, and signaled gently to pull him up, trotting away. "If you encounter the enemy again, use piercing attacks whenever possible, and don't shatter their visors easily. And be especially careful to avoid the red lightning." Wolfhead was lucky to escape this time, but you won't be so lucky next time, Daff warned his soldiers as they retreated. The demon lizardman didn't have a strong counterattack against a bloodline warrior's close combat. This was partly due to the sudden encounter, and the infiltration team, using camouflage, caught them off guard. It was also partly due to the fact that these aliens' talents seemed to be solely designed to defend against spellcasters' magical attacks. Whether it was their highly magic-resistant leather armor or their shape-shifting blackwater weapons, their sudden attacks, unaffected by any magical fluctuations, made them difficult for spellcasters to defend against. However, the bloodline warriors, using brute force physical attacks, and the mortal soldiers wielding magic spears were able to defeat them in return. As for why the magic spears, also powered by magic, could penetrate their anti-magic barriers and inflict fatal damage, this mystery remained unresolved even by His Majesty Harvey and the high-ranking research mages, and even more so by roughnecks like Dave. The team advanced silently and swiftly, finally cautiously following the narrow corridor and reaching an open area. The circular space's ceiling was inlaid with the same flickering luminous crystals. From above, numerous fine pipes descended, and hundreds of rusted blackwater weapon tanks, connected to the ends, sat quietly on the ground in the center. This was the chamber where the lizardmen restocked their blackwater weapons. Dave stepped forward and ripped a pipe apart, only to find a thick stream of black water, reeking of iron, gushing out from the break. With a sudden thought, he turned and glanced at the soldier in charge of the demolition mission. The soldier immediately understood and pulled a square alchemical bomb, the size of a brick, from his backpack. This was a recent development in Chris's alchemical lab, a byproduct of a high-explosive magic energy aerial bomb. It contained two mutually repelling magic stone particles. Once activated, it only took 30 seconds for the energy of the magic stone elements to collide and instantly detonate the compressed, highly concentrated dragon flame powder. The violent surge of magic power would not only attract the demon lizardmen to approach quickly, but the subsequent shockwave would also blast the bomb's hundreds of neatly stacked steel balls outward, turning any demon lizardman within a radius of dozens of meters into a sieve. They had brought 10 of these alchemical bomb bricks for this operation, more than enough to destroy a chamber used to inject liquid weapons. Another violent tremor and boom echoed overhead, and the entire chamber's walls began to undulate and wriggle. Dave silently calculated the time. It must be the bombing squad's final round of bombing. Time was running out. Dropping 2 activated alchemical bombs, the team, unconcerned about exposing themselves, sprinted away from the engulfed weapons chamber, pushing forward a distance. Entering an open space again, they discovered another blackwater chamber. Dropping 2 more time bricks, they followed with a loud explosion from behind, and the 10 men rushed forward once more. The corridor beneath their feet seemed to slope slightly, and Dave keenly noticed, they seemed to be running on a single, unbranching, spiraling path. The interior of the floating island fortress was surprisingly not a sprawling, insect hive-like labyrinth. Instead, each entrance and exit crack at the bottom corresponded to a spiral corridor, plus several supply chambers for the blackwater weapons. The height difference along the way and the feedback from the aftermath of the bombing overhead indicated that after entering from the underwater, the infiltration team had not yet reached the floating island's surface. If each crack represented a spiral corridor, then there must be at least hundreds of independent spatial areas within the floating island. The end of the spiral corridor must be the core of the fortress, where all the corridors converged. Boss. Still bombing, the soldier in charge of demolition weighed the 4 remaining bricks in his hand. Why don't we leave some behind to blast through the inner wall of the floating island and open an exit to the outside when we evacuate? The shadow magic stones are almost exhausted. This corridor seems to have nothing else except the weapons room. Where did the rest of the magic lizards go? Assuming that each corridor corresponds to a combat unit, there should be at least 100 enemies here. Did His Majesty estimate that there are 20,000 to 30,000 enemies inside floating island number 1? But as Dafu and his men advanced upward, aside from the small group of less than 10 led by a red lizardman they encountered upon entering, they only managed to kill 4 or 5 stray enemies fleeing downward. Even if the initial bombing had alarmed a number of demon lizardmen, there were surely more inside than just these few. Where could the remaining enemies be hiding? 3 consecutively destroyed weapons chambers in the rear blocked the pursuit. The instantly ignited black water sent a strong rusty stench mixed with scorching air currents rushing upward. Going any higher would put them within the range of the airborne bombardment, and the chance of accidental casualties was too great. Defu felt that reaching the final weapons chamber ahead was sufficient. The remaining 4 alchemical bombs would be just the right amount to blow through the bulkhead, creating a gap for their escape. Huh? Why isn't this the weapons compartment? The powerful warrior with a wolf's head asked in confusion. Boss, look, there's no pipe hanging from the top to transport black water. And the surrounding bulkheads are a bit old. Before he finished speaking, everyone suddenly felt a strange vibration coming from the ground under their feet, as if they were stepping on an extremely thick artery of some primitive giant beast. The pulse beat wave after wave, and countless cracks appeared on the wall of the chamber. A large number of magic lizardmen carrying black water cans poured out from the wall, instantly blocking the way forward for Daft's team. Damn it! They are hiding in the walls of the corridor. No wonder the dead magic lizardmen were also swallowed up. Could it be that they were eaten after death and spit out after being revived? Daft didn't have time to think about it. He quickly pulled out the revolver from his waist. He didn't care that the energy fluctuations emitted by the magic weapon would attract more enemies. Facing hundreds of enemies, relying solely on cold weapons made of enchanted metal could not easily deal with them. Shoot. Shoot. Buy time for the brothers in charge of blasting. Blow up the tunnel wall and evacuate immediately. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.